Welcome to Volya Radio. Слава Україні!
Because culture hour is going to be pretty short with me. When you think of me, you definitely don't think of culture in the same sentence. Robin, I've hijacked your space.
Oh, William, leave you alone with the space for a minute and you take over. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Will. Hello, everyone. We had a little communication issue in the back channels, but here we are. With it is Sunday, November 10th, 7 p.m., which makes it hang on a second here. Have to get anyway. It must be 7 p.m. 7 a.m. in the workers' paradise, correct? I'll worry about the other times later.
8 a.m. in the workers' paradise on Remembrance Day.
Ah, okay. Is that Anzac Day or is that something else?
No, Remembrance Day is the 11th of the 11th, the end of World War I.
World War One. Ah, okay. Yeah. No, I guess it's Veterans Day here, isn't it? Tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
that's what Veterans Day is here. Remembrance Day in the Commonwealth, and
Yeah.
remembering the war to end all wars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, I remember the very moving scene in Downton Abbey where they unveiled the statue to remember the lost in World War One and recited that poem that I don't remember off the top of my head really, but they will not grow weary. You know that famous poem. Very moving. Yeah, it's important. It's important to remember. We're in the midst of that now. Ukraine seeing the people who are being lost in a righteous war, and it's unfortunately is not anything new. Adam, welcome. Доброго вечора.
Доброго вечора, Pani Robin? Я не знаю.
Yeah, get those endings right.
No, I can't. I'm losing it. What's happening? Tell me, Will.
Доброго ранку, Robin. Yeah. So look, the bad timing here in Australia, but I'll just touch on something else a little bit culture-wise that's struck me through the weekend here because it's Remembrance Day. The public television channel here, SBS, has been running war movies, and not war movies, a lot of rah stuff, but the sort of stuff that has some hopefully deeper meaning to it. Now, probably some people are going to laugh when I say that. So I watched Saving Private Ryan the other night, because I wanted to get my mood back better, right? So I watched Saving Private Ryan the other night, kind of forgetting what it was like.
Me too. So did I.
Yeah, and so I watched it because and I was just enthralled by it, frankly, because it's it's frankly a pretty confronting movie if you think through how it works through to its final message. And I was wondering while I was watching that, I was thinking, you know, um, Steven Spielberg with the movies he's made about World War II, you can really tell how much the Second World War and the things that made a difference to his family carry through to his work. And the message of that movie at the end, make this worth it, right? Because pretty much everybody that goes to get him dies, and it's also got some pretty powerful poetry in there that Abraham Lincoln wrote in two different places. It's it just made me remember how people used to think about this sort of war, this sort of war that's going on right now in Europe, in a whole different way. And even during the midst of it, there were people who wrote about and had the sense of the how it was a part of the overall important arc of history, what they were doing. And we've lost a lot of that. We really lost touch in the world on Remembrance Day, like we're going to have in Australia, where people are actually, Remembrance Day is meant to be remembering what we're here for. And so yeah, I was I just sat down to turn on a movie and try to take my mind off things, but it was probably a little too thanky, that movie, as well as some others, because I also watched Platoon the next night, because I come home a little later in the evening and then want to just turn something on, and those two movies are back to back. Send a pretty a sobering message about war, I guess.
God bless you. I can't watch anything like that at this point. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One of the reasons I think that the United States has made so many wrong steps in our lack of full bore support for Ukraine is in part because we just don't remember history. People don't, the United States has been in a privileged position in that we haven't had a war on our soil since what 1865, and we don't really understand what war means. And our education system does not go into that much anymore either. It's frightening the lack of historical knowledge that a lot of people have. It's something that I think we really need to work on. I don't know how it is in Canada, Adam. I suspect it's probably better.
Oh, I'm surrounded by MAGA people here in Alberta who think that that everything's going to be cool and that the tariffs won't happen to 75% of our. So I'm quite disillusioned with the state of education of my polity right now in relation to their reaction. But I'm in the Texas of Canada, so I bite my tongue a lot every day.
Boy,
Lexicon.
yeah, go ahead, Lexicon. Yeah.
No, I'm with you, Adam. I don't have high hopes for whenever we have to go to the polls, but was already some effect of American politics seeped into the last election. I thought some weird things happened that never used to happen, and I don't know. I don't know. I'm so turned off watching any of it that I can't make a judgment. But obviously, if it infiltrated so many minds, brains, and I use the term reservedly, um, there is going to do the same thing here. We just are usually a pale reflection, or we often are a pale reflection of what's going on. I was just thinking that, so I mean, I've turned off everything. I had been watching mindless movies to get to November 5th, and, I was sorry I did. And now there's nothing mindless enough I can't stand the TV. I'm not looking at any news to do with anything. I did today, for the first time, listen to a little bit of Canadian commentary on how it'll affect Ukraine. But anyway, and then I just, fortunately, Twitter, is so curated that I only see stuff to do with Ukraine mainly, can skip over other stuff. But I just wanted to say that Molly McHugh wrote a good post, and it was somebody like, I think Mick Ryan was the one who had retweeted it. And so I also retweeted it. Not that that'll get you anywhere. It sounds like this algorithm is amazing. More and more people have said basically, 5 people see what any of us post. But anyway, Mick Ryan is still. So I would suggest people try and find on his feed or my feed or Molly McHugh's feed. So she wrote something pretty worthwhile and sort of a little bit lecturing about how, if America doesn't and we in the West don't get off the just in that choosing to think of other things, our own existential crises, then it'll just go away. It won't bother us. It's like a post COVID kind of thinking, like we have our own stuff to deal with here. And so it's not for us to be worrying about that other stuff that's happening to you guys. And if we just It's like in the road, like the Chinese drivers, you never make eye contact with, or Philippines the same. Don't make eye contact with the driver, because if you make eye contact with the driver, that means you saw him, so you should have got out of the way. So it's your fault. So you don't make eye contact with them, and that way it can't be your fault. See? And this is basically, yeah, I guess I should write something like that, rewrite Molly McHugh's article. But anyway, it's worthwhile read. Um, and it just says that we better really wake up because it does matter. And I guess that I read a few articles like that, and otherwise I just don't communicate. I've gone back to arts and crafts and
Um,
reading our book.
Yeah, Adam has thrown it up in the nest already, this article, so people can take a look
Oh,
at it.
good.
Thank you. Yeah, I know what you mean. I was actually at an engagement party for a friend of our, family friend, and it is so hard to be with people who just. I mean, I couldn't wait to get back to be with all of you guys, with people who understand, who people know what's going on in the world. So many people, and it's, as you're saying, it's, well, we're going to worry about our own little, we don't want to hear about anything else. We're just going to worry about our own stuff, as though by ignoring the world, it isn't going to come to our doorstep. I mean, this is the thing that it's very hard to have to deal with all this stuff, but we're going to deal with it sooner or later. And by ignoring it, it makes everything that much more dangerous. Boy, we've really gotten started on an upbeat note tonight, Adam.
Well,
You're
don't look at
welcome.
me. I'm not
Yes,
feeling very upbeat.
I
The
know.
stuff
Yeah, well, I
I've been
don't think
hearing
any
in the
of us
real
are.
world
Yeah,
around me from real people who seem to accept fascism. But you can't
yeah.
say it because then they get mad. But they're like, this one guy's going to fix everything. Don't you worry. I'm like, he says, you're Canadian, bro. Yeah, yeah. He'll never do the tariffs. He's going to build all our pipelines for us. It's going to be awesome. And I'm just like, when is he gonna fucking mobilize people to come and steal our water? That's my thing. I'm just so scared. I'm scared of you guys. I'm sorry,
That's
Robin.
right.
I'm
You've got
scared of
that
you
big
guys.
tap up there.
Yeah, exactly. No, I would say be comforted slightly, Adam, in that the U.S. government bureaucracy moves very slowly. I mean, we've seen that when we wanted it to move faster, but that is a good thing in the case of some of Trump's wackier ideas. He may want to do things, but he has to manage to get the entire bureaucracy to do whatever it is. So I'm
The
not I'm
entire
not.
bureaucracy that he's gonna purge of anything but loyalists is the plan, right?
No, even that. I
Okay.
mean, even that is, yeah, he may want to do that. We'll see how far he gets. It's all of this is, I mean, it's a very bad situation. There's no question about it. But the founding fathers in our form of government, there are a lot of there are a lot of points built into it that will stop the headlong progress of anything. Unfortunately, I mean, this is what has happened partly with getting weapons to Ukraine, is having to overcome that. So it's not always a good thing. But I would say, I mean, I think we're stuck with it now. We have to work with what we've got. But I would advise you not to get too despondent to start with. Remember, the first 4 years of
I'm
Trump
not
were not
despondent.
pretty.
I'm gonna get armed actually,
Whoop,
and
you
I'm
just
gonna
started
let
rubber
every
banding.
American know that we have lots of mountains and hills and caves to hide in. Just let you
Okay. I
know.
was okay. I was going to invade, but I guess I can't. Lexicon, is someone still rubber banding? Adam, are you hearing me all right?
I heard you just fine. Yeah, I hear
Yeah,
All
you're
I
fine.
everybody.
hear is rubber bands.
Well, maybe you should recycle, buddy.
God bless Elmo. All right. Yeah.
So we'll really see, Robin. We will see whether or not a person who rejects the rule of law and the norms of how we work together, which is, as I said, one of the real dangers of these folks, like the norms of not getting, one president at a time, adding Elon Musk to calls with presidents of other states at this point in time when he's not, these sorts of things. But this is the sort of thing that your common MAGA supporter wants Trump to do: shake up the world, shake it up, and just do things quicker, but do things without the deliberation and thoughtfulness that the Congress and Senate and things do. So we'll see. We'll see who he tries to put in for his
Yeah,
cabinet
Secretary of
people,
Defense. Yep.
his appointed, and we'll see whether or not Congress lines up behind him. He's going to have the Senate and the House, so it's he has the mandate to do whatever he wants. They may have some reservations, but what we're really looking for initially is to see what he'll do with the executive order, and how far he'll want to push that, because as you and I have argued about before, the problem I see with Republican presidents in the since Reagan's time, when I left the country, is this push toward a unitary president that has ultimate power and now ultimate immunity with the way he's stacked the Supreme Court. So yeah, I mean it's very anxious, troubling times. But the thing about it is, uh, even if, let's say, the worst case occurred, that Vladimir Putin was intimately involved from 2016, 2020, and 2024 in trying to disrupt and get uh, Trump elected president. Let's say that all is 100% true. The key is, once you become the most powerful person in the world again, what do you do with that power? And there can only be one dictator at a time, too. So even if Putin were to have helped uh, him get elected, once he's in the office, he literally owes nothing to anybody, right? He owes nothing to Putin. He owes nothing to his supporters. He can act with impunity, and we'll see what he does.
Yeah, and he's
Management
not. He
management
can't
of his
run for
chaos might
reelection.
be key. Yeah, but management of his chaos might be key to getting outcomes that we favor.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. And I was just going to say, I mean, he also can't run for reelection, so he doesn't even have he doesn't even have the the thought that he has to behave himself a little bit so he gets reelected. So yeah, no question, this is a really bad situation. We're just going to have to see how it plays out and be able to, we just are going to have to keep on fighting. That's the only thing we can do.
Is it silence or
Fortunately,
else?
rich white guys like me and Adam are going to be fine.
Right, exactly. Lexicon, do you hear me right now? Adam, I think Lexicon may need to recycle. I have a feeling she's not hearing me.
Yeah, I don't know if she's
Yeah,
hearing anybody.
or Lexicon has to recycle, because I can hear you fine and I can hear Adam. Can I
Yeah,
hear Mary?
I can hear you guys, but you've only come back now.
yeah.
Can you
Can
hear
you do
me?
you hear Lexicon? Do you hear me now? Oh, guys, you better tell her to recycle. Yeah, okay,
I
good. And
can
Yeah,
I can
Mar-
hear
okay,
everybody.
and Marion,
yeah,
you're up.
Lexicon, you definitely need to recycle. You can't hear Robin, but
Yeah,
proceed.
she's recycling. Let's go to Mary. Thanks, Will. Mary, go ahead.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I just wanted to say, Robin, I just wanted to second what you were saying earlier. Um, for anyone who's interested, I highly recommend going back and there's some really great books and some really great information you can research on why the founding fathers set up our government the way that they did. And why they did not make it a straight democracy. And that was because they feared that democracies could be taken over by that they could fall into tyranny too easily, a straight democracy. And so that is why we are not considered a straight democracy. Um, so that's that whole thing you hear all the time of the Republicans, the MAGAs will always say, "Well, we're not a democracy. We're a republic." Because anything that has "dem" in the word automatically to MAGAs are bad, right? But you know, but really, it's much more complicated than that. But it's to prevent one person from having too much power. And yes, even if he has the Senate and the House, it is way more complicated than that. And this is not the first time that that there's been someone who is absolutely awful who's had power. Look at the person who took over after Lincoln was assassinated. Johnson was the worst and actually was impeached, and then they decided to bring back the impeachment. But anyways, I'm not going to get into all of the awful American history, but this is not the first time that America has had a terrible president. Sadly, it probably won't be the last time. So it's amazing how intelligent our founding fathers were for them to create this thing that they created. So I highly recommend people actually go and read it and do research on it. And there are some great podcasts that go into depth of where they read writings of some of the guys, of where they talk about in their own words of why their fears and why they wrote it that way. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out to everybody who's all it is awful. I don't disagree with that, but I don't foresee that we're going to become Cuba. Like, I saw someone posted videos of Fidel Castro and all of that. Like, I mean, come on, people. You're beginning to sound like MAGA people here. I mean, some of the stuff I've been seeing on Twitter lately, it's like it's just ridiculous. Like, it's the same stuff that we've harassed these people for the past 3.5 years for sounding like nut jobs walking around with tinfoil hats on. So, anyways, I'm done. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Well said. Yeah, Lexa, come back to you now.
Yeah, I guess I was here anyway. Why was it meant back a couple spots ago to say, Will, did you must sounds like you also rewatched Vice. Anyway, I went and rewatched that. What a riot. It's of course it's from another time. It's very um pedantic or didactic, or whichever, both, but it's extremely funny. Anyway, that was in pursuit of the unitary presidency, and there was a consequential vice boy. Imagine, and now he thinks that went too far. But I did want to say that what has been very impressive is Ukrainians, from the president on to the leastest citizen. Um, I think that Zelensky's report of his conversation with Trump was absolutely brilliant. It sounds like he probably did snag some kind of, he piqued that guy's interest. I mean, he didn't strike a note wrong. And then everything I'm reading, maybe it's just our Ukrainian friends that I see, because if it was anybody else, I guess they're not posting in English or something. At any rate, they are to a person just didn't falter. As somebody was saying, that before the election, people kept asking, "Well, aren't you worried? Aren't you worried?" And they kept saying, including friends that I talk to myself, "Well, we'll just deal with whatever it is. That's what we've always had to do," and it's exactly true. And as we've been saying for months now, we've all been coming to the sad realization that Ukraine has to fight this itself. We've seen all kinds of amazing strategic initiatives that Ukraine has taken, and doing brilliant things like Kursk, and revealing its strategic moves gradually, and owning at least it seems to me this way, honestly. I think that Ukraine owns its agenda to the extent you can when you're the smaller party, when you have unreliable allies, unreliable supplies, a small population that's being strained to every sinew. But given all of those things, it has maintained the initiative. It keeps pulling fast ones, and keeping the Russians' heads snapping back and forth. And we have seen with this doom. Fortunately, Europe was looking with doom and gloom at this election. Turns out they were all right. I said back at Davos that Europe had already conceded the election to Trump. And so, aside from a brief, gaudy 100 days, Europe has been talking about this eventuality and thinking up things to do. Praise the Lord that they all woke up to the possibility of sending the interest on the frozen assets to Ukraine. Well, maybe the Lord will sort of, or Uncle Sam, will put into their heads the notion that maybe we should start looking at some of the principle as well. And because we know very well, if push comes to shove, those assets alone can fund the war. And Timothy Garden Ash has never been shy about it. He is the greatest proponent. He says it's insane to do otherwise. He basically wants 150 billion a year for 3 years, and Russia will be done and dusted. And there's another guy who's somebody else is pushing 800 billion they want. But at any rate, we have some Europeans, including Brits like Ash, who are making this case, and the Ukrainians themselves. I just have been tremendously impressed with the equanimity, the sort of skeptical, cynical, but courageous way they have simply carried on, kept cool and calm and carried on. And I just wish to God more stuff would get there. But anyway, Chuck was right when he told us that this war would take 3 more years, and it certainly hasn't been sped up. But I just have to say, I'm really impressed with my people.
Yeah, Alexa, I'm glad you said this because I've had exactly the same experience. There are 4 Ukrainian people who I speak with on a very regular basis, and it's just so impressive. And what I've been really, I mean, what I have, what really touches my heart is how clear they are on who their allies are. I've been attacked by people outside of Ukraine because I'm an American and all Americans are terrible. None of my Ukrainian friends has said anything like my Ukrainian friends have all, if anything, commiserated with me because they knew I must be upset. And as you're saying, it's they to a person, everyone I've spoken with is unhappy with the outcome, but they're looking to see what needs to be done next, and they put their head down and are going ahead and working on whatever comes and what has to be done. And I think we can learn a lot from that. And there's also, I just have to share this because I thought it was really cute. The Ukrainian sense of humor, which has, I think there's a reason why Jews and Ukrainians have, I think in some ways very similar senses of humor. When you've been persecuted long enough, you either become completely embittered, or you find some humor in it just to save your sanity. And this friend of mine, he said he's pro. There's a pro and a con here. Well, the con is we're screwed. The pro is so is everybody else. So anyway, I just thought it was very cute. Anyway, over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Robin. Um, I mean, I think the thing is for and not trying to put myself into what a Ukrainian person thinks, but I mean, in all reality, what option do they have? I mean, whoever wins the election in America, they have to continue to fight. They have to continue to teach their children. They have to continue to make sure that their kids are fed and happy as much as they have to continue to live their lives. And that's, I think, the part of for so many people who live in such a privileged lifestyle that so many Americans, even Americans who struggle, they don't really understand because they don't face those kinds of struggles. That they don't understand what it's like to be able to where okay, it doesn't whatever happens, you have to continue to fight. You can't just throw your hands up and say, I'm giving up, which is really upsetting because I've seen a whole lot of NAFO people who say that they can't continue to support Ukraine because with Trump as a president, it's just a lost cause.
Yeah, and that's bullshit, isn't it, Mary?
That's
That's why
Uh, uh,
I made sure I got back on the air the day after, and have been on the air. But I went back to my regular schedule as fast as I can because you got to. Sure, I'll probably do nothing. I'm going to have zero effect on the outcome of this war, but I'm going to do what I can with what I've got.
and that's exactly. I mean, but how privileged is it that we have that ability? I mean,
And they don't
they
have that
don't.
luxury, do they? They
Right.
don't have the luxury. That they don't get a timeout to feel bad.
Exactly, and that was the only thing I wanted to say, and, and my mom, she suffered a brainstem stroke and became paralyzed, and I remember my husband one time, she lived with us, my parents ended up moving in with us afterwards, and my husband said to her, "How are you so positive all the time after this? You were, like, after everything you've gone through," and she's like, why wouldn't I be? She's like, I survived. Like, I'm here. Like, and what option do I have? Like, I could sit and be upset about what happened, or I could continue to live my life the best I can. And I feel like that is what more people need to do, and I feel like that's, like, kind of the mentality that Ukrainians have, and maybe it's because my mom kinda grew up with my grandfather, who was a World War II vet, who was very much, he was an Omaha Beach guy who was very much the guy you charge into battle, so anyways, thanks, guys.
That's really, really lovely, Mary. And I'm sorry. I warned on Will's space the day after the election that I was going to be a bit whiny and a bit venti for a little bit. So don't mind me. I'll continue the fight. I always will. And your story was lovely. And it reminded me of my Ukrainian mama when she was paralyzed from the neck down in a car accident in 2007 and continued to fight on until 2014. And she was just happy to be alive and get a second chance to be with her kids. And this is the lady who was my Ukrainian patriot mom. So I have a very strong impression about the ability of people who are Ukrainian and have that sort of freedom mindset to keep going against all odds. And thanks for reminding me, Mary. I needed that, obviously, guys, right?
Yeah, well, I think we all do. It's very easy to become despondent, but yeah, it really is not an option. There is the option is we continue to fight on, or we give up and say let's let Russia have Ukraine, and that will never do. So we just have to, we have to keep on fighting, and Ukrainians will keep on fighting. James.
Hey, yeah, great conversation. It really is tempting just to go, fuck it, because it is going to be difficult. And it's something I'm not used to. I have had little difficulty in my life, little domestic messes that, get in the way of the right. Right things happening. So Trump does invite us to do that. Unfortunately, I see Merrick Garland has shut down the prosecution of Donald Trump because, well, the time's running out, isn't it? So what can we do? I say leave it for Donald Trump and his administration to overturn his own prosecution. Don't do it for him. Just keep prosecuting him. I don't understand this. So
Yeah,
this is a
I didn't know there was a statute of limitations on treason.
what it it's like, why are you doing this for him?
He
Why
obviously
why
hasn't
why
hasn't read Snyder about not obeying the
Obviously
advance, right?
not, right? So I'm just like furious about that. So I have to channel it without killing people. That'll be a challenge. Anyway, I can hope they're dead, but I can't talk about doing it or anything like that. But God, I hope some of them just have celestial encounters with beings who take them to another planet.
Well said. Listen, guys. Speaking of totally unrelated topic, but if everybody who's up here, if you could do us a favor and just like and retweet the space. It always takes a while for people to be aware that we're up and running again, and I think it's I've heard from many people who are missing having us around all the time. So when we are up, it's if you could help us by liking and retweeting. And Lexicon mentioned something earlier about how our pro Ukraine posts seem to get buried. Very odd, but it is a good practice as much as you can if you see a pro Ukraine post to go ahead and not just like it. I mean, like it is one thing, but if you actually post some kind of a comment, which could even be something simple like "I agree" or whatever, that helps them to those tweets to get more prominence. So that there's a little something that you can be in the fight even doing that. Just making sure that these pro Ukraine tweets are getting more looks. So anyway, okay, back to you, Adam.
Back to me. Oh, I saw
Back
Oh,
to
hand.
or not,
me.
whatever. Anyway,
Can
Was
I?
James going to say something?
oh,
I
okay,
was.
sorry.
I was
I'm sorry, I
indeed.
didn't see your hand. My apologies, James.
It
Well,
disappeared at the
Elmo.
last minute.
You've been Elmoed. Anyway, um, I just want to say, for one, predictability is good in this business that we do. So I want to announce some predictability. So Monday nights, Robin, James, there we are, 7 to 9. Tuesday and Thursday, James and Terry, 5 to 7.
Oh, terrific. That's great.
So that's Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Aria and I are in discussion about a date, a time. It won't be Saturday, I know that, but we haven't figured it out. It could be an add-on on a Tuesday or Thursday, so I could do a long shift, but I could. I'm thinking like 4 hours, two different co-hosts. That'll work. And beyond that, I don't think I could do it. But so that's sort of what my plan is for the present, and that's plenty. So especially with the prep time. So, anyways, and also, you guys, the Volya radio account is now sort of a library, and I invite you guys to think about it that way. There are a number of things that are there saved as sessions, and the people who know post also to the purple pill or the spaces chat space where you can make comments. That sticks to the recording. So if you listen to it again, so I encourage people to build on that. So, for example, if you're looking at the time and you know that we're 2.2 hours in, and James just told the best joke in the world, then you could like say blah ha ha, for other people. So I hope you'll think about our timeline as a little bit of a library. They all are. We've just never tried to organize it that way, and this is a way that listeners can participate in building up a record. We hope it's not junk that people dump in there, and I know there are some people that like to junk up our stuff, but yeah, if you've got a news story, whatever, welcome to that idea that it's not what goes into the nest is important, but it's also important because people are listening to the repeat. So I'm going to have to tune in to see what our listenership is in the second and third runs. You know what I mean? Anyway, sorry, I blab on.
No, that's thank you, James. That's good, and then thank you for stepping up. If you need a second co-host for something, let me know. I think we are really it's taken us a while to recover from. It was a little traumatic for some of us. We're very happy to have started Volya Radio, but it's been a little hard, and we're getting more and consistent times now, which is great. I just also wanted to mention, in addition to what James has said about checking on our timeline, which is very useful. We have Spotify. We have a Spotify account. I just prepared the 20th and 27th of October. Those podcasts will be of the book club will be going up in the next day or two. It's not totally up to date on Spotify, but it is curated and has been They're easier to listen to because we do some processing to make it a little bit flow a little bit better. It's really neat the processing. I was using Adobe Audition, which I'd never used before. But anyway, so those are going up slowly. That's another place to check. And we've got great intro music for our book club. So go over there and check it out. Anyway, and Adam, I think you have a bunch. You have a few very interesting cultural articles that maybe we can get to before we get into the book.
Yeah, I just also wanted to mention the first tweet in the nest, which Tracy SBU fella, our friend and co-host, did a thread of all of Volya Radio's different social network accounts. So bookmark that one. I don't really Instagram, but I definitely listen to on Spotify. It's great place to go back and listen to stuff too. But I didn't really think about it doing it James's way before. What? Oh, James's hand is gone. So what are we gonna talk about here? There was some Ukraine world stuff, as always, and
Yep, I saw one about Ukrainian pop music, which, as you know, is one of my favorites, and also about the UNESCO, which I think is a very important article about what's been going on. When I saw the article you had posted, I went and looked at the UNESCO website, and so they really have been very active in Ukraine, and it's an important thing to talk about what's going on with the cultural heritage of Ukraine. And I think Adam may be in the midst of getting something up in the nest, I suspect. The first,
no, just
oh,
Mike
that
button.
happens
Talking
too.
to muted mics,
Oh, that's always
telling
interesting.
James to talk and wondering why he didn't talk.
Oh,
Oh,
I'd be on it right away if I were allowed. I forget now what was I talking about? No, I was thinking about some of the things I heard last night around discussion around Transnistria, and I was thinking about the same principles apply sort of to Kaliningrad and what Europe, what can they do? What can they do to get this thing going and get it going in the right direction in time to carry through, really well? And I think they can win because America is eventually going to get lost one person at a time. And right now, there's 70% of people or so that want Ukraine in the world. And I think it's up to us to motivate the 330 million people that we've got to, think hard about who they really want to support. So I look forward to a better plan for how we address Americans in particular about this because they vote. And how can we really get this across when all of the spaces that we're in are controlled by not necessarily friendly forces of oligarchy.
one thing I was just thinking about as you're speaking, James. One advantage at this point is there's a lot of the mainstream news media that is not MAGA friendly, and we may end up getting better coverage of Ukraine because of that, because of the reaction to Trump. This is not it's not worth it. I would rather not have that as an upside. But I think would be a very good time to be trying to get things placed in newspapers and trying to really double down on what our media is covering. I know that Rosin for Ukraine is doing a lot about that now, and that's if you have options to talk to people, to write letters to the editor, this may be a very good time to do it because of that.
Absolutely, Robin. Um, well, James, what's up?
Well, I was thinking about Thanksgiving because it's coming up, and one of the American traditions in this time is to listen to a piece of music that's rather long. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Robin or Adam. An old folk song. You can get anything you want. You know that song? Anyway,
Alice's Restaurant?
yes.
I had no idea that was a tradition. I
Well,
love it.
it is a meaningful song after all. So, anyway, it is long.
Wait, what? Which song?
You can get anything you want at Alice's
Alice's
Restaurant.
restaurant, except in Alice.
Except
Except
in
in
Alice.
Alice.
Right?
Yeah.
Who sang
But
that? I don't remember now. Who was that?
Well,
we
several
often take
people, but
it was Arlo Guthrie, the
That's right,
son
that
of
Arlo Guthrie. That's
Woody,
right. Yeah, yeah.
The
Woody
and
son
Guthrie
of
was
your
telling me.
forgotten national bard.
we Canadians, we used to often take a trip down to our southern cousins in Yale, and we learned, we realized on this drive along the highway that it was a tradition to play Alice's Restaurant on Thanksgiving Day in these sort of New Englandy, Vermonty, and so on states going from Montreal down to Yale. And so we kept catching it on local stations. So we heard it about 5 times on the drive back the next day. I used to drive down that, I don't know, whatever. But anyway, who knew? But what a neat
Well,
tradition.
I've
Good
lived
for
here. I've
you.
lived here my whole life, and I didn't know, but I love it. I'm definitely going to start doing that every year now. James, go ahead.
it's the kind of thing that's important for us to understand because if you've never heard it, first it is really long, so be patient with it. But it is sort of a protest song. It's about interactions with governments and things like this, not necessarily on the most friendly of circumstances. So it just reminds me of our current era very much, especially what I anticipate for America after the 20th of the new year. Anyway, yeah, it's a great song. It's funny. It's all the good things about American folk music of the last century. It's great stuff.
One in the war and stuff have to sing loud.
Yeah, that's right. Oh boy, this is the days of my youth. Yeah, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and yeah, we had great protest songs. I must say, I haven't thought about that in ages. That may be something we should be reinventing. James, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say something about that whole genre of protest songs, and some of them are really coherent. What's his name singing "This land is your land, this land is my land"?
Dude,
Yeah,
Woody, Arlo's
That
right.
was
dad.
yeah, Woody
Woody,
Guthrie. Yeah,
Guys,
what a
how
folk
do I
song!
know? It's
It's a
better than
great
yours.
song about just this
and
idea
Pete
that
Seeger.
it
Remember Pete
belongs.
Seeger?
Yeah, and
They were a little Russo friendly, the whole bunch of them, but we'll forgive them because they wrote
Yeah,
great folk
it was
songs.
the times, though. I'm sure they were quite
Yeah, exactly.
cultivated too, right? For Kremlin reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But whatever. Anyway, Adam, it is now 7:48 my time. And okay, and James's hand is up. So we're going to go back to James. Then maybe we can spend at least 10 minutes on your cultural stuff that you have so carefully collected for us. Go ahead, James.
Kojni then. Anyway, um, I'm yeah no I let's move on. I guess I just wanted to say that I think we'll be fine in the United States if we really fight, and put out yard signs and stuff that can't be blocked by some algorithm. You know what I mean? There's going to have to be other ways that we communicate.
And
Corporeal politics.
What? Yes.
It's what the
yeah,
book's about,
exactly. And I
and
think
it's
it's
what.
also important to remember, James, that really we have a 2 year time frame that we really have to fight because I suspect if things go the way I expect them to, that there'll be a huge backlash in the midterms. But we have to get to that point and limit the damage, and and help Ukraine as much as we can in those 2 years. But that I think is the time frame that we're looking at.
And if our buddy Will is right, all of Absurdistan is basically going to poop its pants economically and logistically in mid 2025.
Yeah,
It might be
that's
hope. It might be cope, but let's keep it hope. Hey, James.
I think that's the greatest challenge right there is all the things that we could protest about. Him dropping sanctions in a minute, it might be the first thing on his desk, seriously. So if that's the case, then I think an embargo looks a lot more profitable to pursue uh, for Europe, really. Stop anything from going there. But anyways, he could drop those right away. He has said as much that he wants to drop them.
Yeah, we'll see what happens though. I mean, the backlash I think would be furious. Um, yeah. All right. Anyway, we're not gonna. This is another. We're gonna. Unfortunately, we're in a position now. We just have to wait and see what happens. We have to have our ducks in a row, and we have to be ready to fight with everything we've got. But at this point, we don't know what's going to happen.
It's going to be interesting, right?
Yeah, like that probably spurious Chinese
Exactly.
curse, right? Well, we sure do live in interesting times. Lord help us.
We got 2 months to push them to get the damn stuff out the door, with people already writing articles about how impossible it is. The problem is the stuff just ain't there. We gotta keep it all in case of China. It hasn't been manufactured. It's not that simple. And
Yeah, exactly. All the
they're
bullshit.
saying
Yeah.
there's no way that it's gonna be possible to get it there. God, why wasn't he front end loading? Because he didn't
Yeah,
do that.
yeah. Well, because I think it was all political triangulation. We better not send too much because then Trump will criticize it and then he'll win the election. So let's screw over Ukraine until the election. We'll get Kamala elected and then we'll send all the stuff. And unfortunately, that didn't play out the way they were expecting it, and now they're playing catch up. But yeah, I think I'm just hoping that Biden has had a wake up call and said, you know what your legacy is going to be like if you leave like this, and will hopefully move heaven and earth and get as much of that stuff out the door as is humanly possible. We have our military has great logistics, and so if there's stuff in the warehouse, but we need to manufacture stuff to backfill in. Canada, I'm sure Canada would be happy to promise not to attack us for the next 6 months, so we can get the weapons to Ukraine now.
Are you asking me what?
Well, I mean, we
I'm
can't
saying
send
yeah,
all of
no,
our
I'm
weapons
I'm
away
not
to
we're
Ukraine
not
because God,
going near your guys.
yeah,
We're
right,
gonna start building the world's longest wall here for
yeah,
actually real, I think. No,
I
just
wouldn't
kidding.
blame you honestly.
But just so you know, there's lots of snakes and places where you can break your ankle, and so just don't come up here.
James.
Hundreds of thousands of us a day will cross your border. Anyway, no, that wasn't it.
We have a
But it's
migrant
criminal.
problem here in Canada
Yeah.
now.
Well,
Sorry.
anyway, what was I gonna? You guys, I'm sorry. I really did actually forget my point. It was such a cogent point. I'm sure.
Okay, Adam. Let's talk about Ukrainian pop music for about 2 minutes, okay? I I
Okay.
wanted I want I wanted to mention as this is a wonderful article. I wanted to mention I was speaking to a Ukrainian friend about when I went to the Okanelzy concert, and he said to me something that really sort of it really broke my heart a little bit. And this is just a lead into what Adam is going to talk about. See, he grew up in Kiev, and he said he used to in the 80s and 90s he'd go and listen to the weirdos of Ukrainian pop culture, he said, and that it was considered sort of low professional as opposed to the powerful and mighty Russian pop culture. But he said it spoke to his heart because it was his. And I thought, and this, I think this is what I see about Ukrainian pop music. It speaks to the Ukrainian heart. It's Ukrainian, and it's a wonderful, vibrant, and varied cultural map at this point. Anyway, over to you.
So this article is from ukraineworld.org, my single favorite website. in the universe. And it's called Ukrainian Musical Artists That Have Rocked Generations. So here you go. Check some of them out. Go on their MySpace. Meet some of Ukraine's most iconic musicians and bands and explore their significance over time. Modern Ukrainian musicians have broadened the country's horizons, finding success in nearly every genre. Each niche has its own standout artists and milestones, which we highlight in this article. Vopli Vidoplazia. Nope, Vidoplazova. Vopli Vidoplazova. It's a rock and roll and punk band that started in 1986. Probably, maybe some glasnost business. Vopli Vidoplazova, or simply VV, is Ukraine's merriest band and has been calling tired Ukrainians to dance at the end of the working day since their first album, Tansi, in 1989, which means dance. Tansuvate. So Tansi would be dances. VV brought Western-style rock and roll to Ukraine and made it accessible for all. From their underground origins, they soon evolved into mainstream national stars and were among the few first to export Ukrainian rock and roll abroad. The band toured Europe, the US, and Israel. Afterward, Oleg Skripka, do you recognize that word, Robin? Skripka? The vocalist and composer, it's violin. Or fiddle, I guess. This is Skripka, Raimo Skripka. The vocalist and composer and his bandmate Alexander Pipa, the bass player, decided to stay in France. During their French period, the two played with local guitarist Philippe Moza and drummer Stéphane Mouflier. Those are such great French punk rock names, only not. I'm sure I should recognize them. However, living outside of Ukraine was hard for both of the musicians. They returned home in 1996, followed by the album Muzika in 1997 with its smash hit Vesna. So the album's name is Music, and the smash hit is Spring, as in the season. Strengthened the Ukrainians' public sympathy for the band even more. It was rather symbolic to see such a warmly welcomed band abroad choosing Ukraine over other places. Thus, it has been not only their talent, but their choice of Ukraine, its language, and its people that made VV such an inspiration for the first generations of artists in independent Ukraine. And then we've got Barate Hajdukine, Rock and Roll 1988. If any Ukrainian band is responsible for establishing formula of merry rock for the masses in the Soviet Union, it was Brate Hajdukine, or Haydukin Brothers from Lviv. Founded in 1988, the band took inspiration from Vopli Vidoplazia, sharing a similar spirit and achieving notable success. However, Haydukine's satirical tone struck a different chord, resonating against the drop of the Soviet Union's dissolution. Even though their music mixed rock with blues, reggae, and folk, their delivery and lyrics were most appealing. Their use of the Russian-Ukrainian hybrid dialect known as Surzhyk made them sound familiar and genuine.
You know, these guys were the ones who first sang that song "Fine and Mr. Chernobyl" that I played a while ago, and it's exactly it. It's in Surzhyk, and it's used all sorts of what's the word? Non-standard Ukrainian anyway, and it's just a wonderful, delightful, happy song.
It's like pidgin Ukrainian with a bunch of Russian and Surzhyk, you mean?
Surzhyk. Yeah, no, I'm just saying. Also, just did they use non? I know. My Ukrainian teacher told me that this was not the kind of Ukrainian that Ukrainian Catholic University was trying to teach its students. Anyway, back to you.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not going to get through this whole article, but I'll post it once we start. I'll post a tweet of it. But there's a bunch of bands you should check out. There's Tsuka.
There are videos in there of the bands. You can hear what some of them sound like.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's experimental avant folk, whatever that means, and then there's V. There's a dark folk band, Katya, Chili, Pop and Electronic, 1996. There's progressive metal band, and then there's Daka Braka. They're my favorite. Is the last one? Looks like Daka Braka. So see, I just wanted to get to the Daka Braka before we started book club. Anyways, guys, we'll start book club. I'll do the nest work, and I'll post a couple things there, Robin, and I'll get our card for book club. Book club is starting now.
Yep. Sorry, my son just tried to call. I'm just sending him a text that I will speak to him afterwards.
Ladies
Anyway,
and
yeah, thank
gentlemen,
you.
this is book
Yeah,
club with
yeah,
Robin
yes, here
texts
we
her
go.
son.
With thank you, Adam. I'm done. But I have trouble talking and chewing gum at the same time, you know. Yeah, anyway. Okay, so we now are in book club. We are reading, as many of you know, Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War, a chronicle and analysis of the Revolution of Dignity by Mychailo Wynnyckyj. We are in chapter 6, and um my son just wrote back that he's in space. Okay, anyway, never mind. Okay, so we're on chapter 6. We're in the middle of the chapter. Um, we are talking about, as you probably remember, we are now into the analysis part of the book, and we're talking about the different theories of what make revolutions and how the Ukrainian revolution fits in to those patterns, some better and some not so good. We were starting in on the structural Marxist realism, which I know um, Lexicon had some criticism of what he was saying, which I defer to because I know very little about this. I'm going to continue from where we stopped last time, and Lexicon, feel free to jump in if there's something that doesn't square with how you understand this. Because, as I said,
Can you just tell me the page number you're on?
It's a
That'd be great.
section called Structural Marxist Realism, and I did not put page numbers in this stupid thing this time. It just 217. Boy, that was something. It just happened to open to the right page. Okay, page
Hallelujah.
217. Yeah. All right. Okay, so that's the beginning of this. We're in the middle of that section anyway. It starts in 217. Okay, so realists. They talk about Russia's soft intervention, as he calls it, in Ukraine's political affairs during the Yanukovych regime was justified by the threat of not NATO expansion to include Ukraine. This was the excuse that they gave. I love this soft intervention. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, it's messing with a sovereign, independent country's internal affairs, but soft intervention. I guess it's because they didn't come in with tanks at that point. Anyway, so this threat of NATO expansion, this was a fallacy, of course. We've talked about this before. Ukraine's NATO membership became a realist option for the political elites in Ukraine only after the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of the Donbass. And it was only in 2016 that a majority of Ukrainians supported NATO membership. So, anyway, Adam, you have a note here.
So slow with nest work. Ella,
Sorry.
everyone pull out your sticky notes. Every paragraph in this chapter is a precise and concise debunking of every Western Vatnik narrative on Ukraine. So here you go. You can be like a big nerd and just pull out your copy of Ukraine's Maidan with its sticky notes and talk them off the podium.
Yep, good point. Yeah, and knowledge is power. I mean, one of our advantages here is Ukraine is so clearly in the right, and Russia is so clearly in the wrong. It's great to be on the side of the righteous, and it's just a matter of having the information at your fingertips because it all supports Ukraine's right to live free and free in their own country without people coming across the border and attacking them. Um, yeah, and anyway, yeah. So, and also, I mean, in addition to the fact that the NATO membership was not an issue at the time when Russia was starting to mess, during Yanukovych, the other thing too is that, as they pointed out, NATO isn't expanding. NATO has you have to apply to join NATO. NATO doesn't say we're taking you over. So there is no NATO expansion. Ukraine decided as a result of being attacked again by Russia that they wanted to be in NATO to protect them from the Russians. Has nothing to do with, there was no NATO is not a threat to Russia in it, except in the sense that that Ukraine wanted to be part of NATO so that Russia couldn't have their way with them. So that's the only, well, if
Also,
that's a threat, tough.
Finland and Sweden,
Also true. Yes. Yeah. Well, also the
which he
Baltics
didn't
have
know
been.
at the time of the book.
Yes, that's true. But the Baltics were in NATO, and Russia never felt particularly threatened about that right on their border. So it's just the whole thing is bullshit. Anyway, okay, but unfortunately for people who don't know any better, this is these Russian talking points people buy into. So as we're saying, put your post-it notes in and have this book at the ready to debunk any of these talking points, which you may get from well-intended people who just don't know any better. Anyway, so okay, so Wynnyckyj says the structural analysis of the all of this business that we're reading about, one of the things that makes it clear that it was not the case, because it couldn't possibly account for the masses of people in people in the streets and in Kiev demonstrating, millions of people staying on the streets for months in the middle of the winter. It's pretty hard to explain as a subversive plot by the West, or that they're just a bunch of radical nationalists. This absolutely couldn't stand up to empirical scrutiny. Lexicon, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I think the whole section, his critique of structural realism, i.e., Mearsheimer, I've taken to using Ash's pronunciation. Mearsheimer, like Marschenheimer, Futzenheimer. I guess he portrayed himself. I hadn't heard of the guy until Ukraine happened to me, and so I realized, going back looking at all these old videos of his that from years ago that seemed to be around, that he thought of himself as a leftist, or he does. And you notice he pitches up, and so you see something 7 years ago, 11 years ago, in some crowd that seems to have some pretensions of leftism, but I thought of him as some kind of Chicago school, I don't know what. Anyway, though, Wynnyckyj's explanation in the first paragraph is the big weakness, because to my mind, this guy has nothing to do with Marxism, and this definition of the way that poor old Wynnyckyj understands what Marx thought about the class conflict being the basis for all social relations and all this jazz. I mean, I don't need to explain it, but I just think that that is completely hokey. And let's just call it. So I guess he thinks that this structuralism is Marxist because Marx talked about the class structure of society. Maybe Mearsheimer started out learning something about that and went on to evolve his theories. I don't know. And as I said, I'm sure there are a number of leftists who do like or did like this guy. I don't know the history of it. But so if you just like ignore the first paragraph, then the rest of it, call it realism. I'd put realism in air quotes. But then so I think it's all very good, except that, he goes on and talks about how what this means is that states respond to their own interests. But the fact is, the critiques we've been seeing are that it's only big states that can respond to their interests, their own interests, but everybody else has to be in their sphere of influence. And unfortunately, the realists are totally into like what the real reality for small states is that Big Brother is gonna fuck you, and you just gonna have to take it. And that's the way it is, and I guess that's the way it should be for us in Canada, and it ought to be that. I don't know, I mean, how he explains the rest of the world, I don't know, but at any rate, yeah, supposedly everybody in the OAS and on this side of the ocean has to just do what, America wants, and so, in the Russosphere, then, there is no point attempting t anyway, we do not acknowledge any interests of a smaller country like Ukraine. And the guy also knows nothing whatsoever about Ukraine, nor do any of these very real realists seem to know a thing about the small countries. But I think the essence of their theory is the disregarding of the agency of countries that fall within the sphere of influence of the real powers. And that's all that's real for Mearsheimer. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Lexicon. I think that's right. By the way, Mearsheimer is, I think, the correct pronunciation, so you might want to go back to pronouncing it the other way. But anyway, I just because I think the in German with the S is at the end of uh uh um one syllable, and the H is the start of this of the next. It doesn't get a sh sound. There has to be a C, but whatever.
Right,
Never
right,
mind.
right. You're
Yeah.
right, I'm sure.
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted James, give me just a second, then I promise. Don't forget what you want to say. A Ukrainian friend of mine sent this to me, and is speaking of class struggle and Marxism. I just love it. From a Ukrainian philosopher v- uh, and potty mouth comedian named Les Pereviansky. And unfortunately, he does a lot of his stuff he does in Surzhyk, so that I don't ever will don't will ever never have a prayer of understanding it. But I want to read this because it just cracked me up. It says regarding Karl Marx. We all studied the class struggle, and what are classes in the world? They're the poor and the rich. The poor don't like the rich. That's where the struggle comes from. But here, this idea falls apart because in reality, jerks are a class where being rich or poor doesn't matter because a poor jerk and a rich jerk are still jerks. Therefore, the class affinity of a poor jerk is closer to that of a rich jerk rather than to an educated poor person or an educated rich person. This is why a poor jerk will always vote for a rich jerk rather than for a poor intellectual or rich intellectual. In other words, a poor jerk and a rich jerk form one class, and Marx's theory misses the mark. So just, I leave that with you to ponder. Okay, over to you, James.
I thought it was pronounced Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer. Are we talking about the same guy?
Yeah, I don't. Let me look it up. If it's
She's just
SH,
explaining to you that
if
if
it's
you actually
SH,
looked at
there is no
German,
SH in German to
You're
make
both
it.
that's right.
wrong. It's Moosh Creamer.
Right.
Yeah, it's Mearsheimer, because in German the sh sound is made by sch. Here, the s is the end of the syllable Mears, and then Heimer is a common is a common part of a name. You get Mannheimer, or whatever other Heims there are, but it's
Durkheimer,
yeah, so it really is. It's
Badheimer.
correct. Would correctly pronounce it would be Mearsheimer, but I commend mispronunciation of this guy's name if that's what you choose to do. Like I commend a mispronunciation of any Russian word. So, yeah, James.
His first idea was best, and that was to use Ukraine as the nuclear bulwark against Russia. And that is not such a bad idea then and now, I think. But it's a little bit strong, nukes.
Well, if Ukraine had nukes, we wouldn't be where we are today. I mean, there's no arguing with that. So yeah, but unfortunately, he I don't know, he got reached somehow in the meantime.
Nobody gave Ukraine any choice, and he knows bloody well.
Oh, absolutely. No, they were coerced. I mean, it was either get rid of your nukes or your economy, which is in total free fall. We're going to let it just completely collapse. I mean, there was no choice involved at all. Yeah, which is why, Budapest Memorandum or not, why we have such a strong moral obligation to help at this point because we put them in this position. They had no choice in the matter. James.
I do keep wondering about Ukraine's, ability to provide it for itself. And in the nuclear weapons capacity game, I see they've already passed a very, very important stage, and that is to have a really viable long range delivery system, and they are there with they've got the missile technology figured out. And maybe the this election triggered some things in the plans in Ukraine to just to say, well, you know what, let's do that Project X that we don't want to talk to anybody about. You know, the one nudge nudge nuke nuke.
Oh, the one that Israel never talked about either. Yeah, it's Ukraine certainly has the intellectual ability in the country to do anything that they want to. And I think with knowing that the United States is going to be totally unreliable, even unreliabler, that it really it's a matter of the money. So let's just hope that the Europeans step up finally. Um, all right. Anyway, moving on. Okay. Last little quote that he makes in this section, which is the really the this is the money quote for the whole thing, is denying agency to the most active segments of Ukrainian society may have been theoretically acceptable to a scholar writing in Washington, Berlin, or Moscow, but on the ground, this interpretation was patently wrong. And that's the bottom line there. All this business about NATO inspired coup and all this stuff. It's not something can be maintained by anybody who was actually there, or anybody who has seen what went on. And as I said, one of the strengths of this writer is it's hard to argue with him because he was there, and he was filing updates about what was going on the whole time. But um, I think Adam has a valid criticism here. So go on.
No, not of him. I'm sure he held back to maintain his academic credibility, but I don't have to. Patently wrong is far too kind a phrase, I would say. Inhumane, entitled, and genocidal complicity come to mind. So do human shaped anal wart and ivory tower truffle pig. But maybe that's just me. I was in a mood last week.
You were. Yeah, it's colorfully put, but true. Um, well, and as is the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty commentator that he pointed out that there was only one person responsible for the dead, wounded, or displaced, and that is the subject of our next section, which is uh, Huilo Putler, whatever you want. I've decided I'm going to call him Sauron from now on, from
I
Lord of the
like
Rings. I
that. I
don't.
saw that in your latest, in the next.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it fits very well. I'm in the midst of. I'm still in The Hobbit. It's taken me forever because I have all these serious books I'm reading, but it's a great book. Anyway, so yeah, from now on, Sauron is this person who will not be given the respect of having a real name. Okay. So the one person never denied agency in any account of the Ukraine crisis. He's given agency. Um, and it's likely that the invasion into Ukraine that happened right after the end of the Maidan demonstrations was planned well in advance, and it was not a spontaneous decision as a reaction to the threat posed by Russians to Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine by the so-called junta in Kiev. Did I make any sense? I didn't get that out well. In other words, the saying it was a spontaneous decision flies in the face of the fact that we know now that a lot of planning was going on ahead of time. The convenient excuse was poor Russian speakers are being so discriminated against by the fascist junta in Kiev. Anyway, and you have something here too, Adam.
Yeah, I'd want to ask Mychailo if he would write this passage differently today. I always bristle a little when I hear people to espouse the this is one man's war, one man's blah 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 talk. The Machiavellian midget, Volya, is a symptom, not a disease. The responsible party is Moscovia's twisted self-identity and pathetic slavish population, which I think has become abundantly more clear than sort of, it's maybe he was just using that transition of the one man thing to get over, but I just kind of wanted to add in that, all Russians responsible.
Yeah, no, I agree. If Putin were the problem, then getting rid of Putin would be the solution. And I have no faith that if Putin were out of the way, that all of a sudden Russia would turn into a nice liberal democracy that would respect other people's sovereignty. So, boy, Kyiv is really are getting hit a lot. I mean, are under air alert an awful lot lately. Um, anyway, okay. All right. Yeah. No, yeah. As you're saying, it's and then any polling that's been done shows widespread support among the ordinary Russian citizen, the orcs, of what Putin is doing. So this is not just him. Yeah. Um, Okay, now this was an interesting theory. I'd never heard this theory before, and it really to me makes a lot of sense. Elizabeth Wood, who was at the Woodrow Wilson Center, talked about this theory, as has Gary Kasparov, Ilya Ponomaryov, who is he's that Russian friend of Ukraine, isn't he? And journalist, and also Boris Nemtsov, bless memory. Putin's power was connected to a series of small, quick wars to increase his popularity and feed his personality cult. He came to power in that attack on Chechnya, and he had planned. There have been a bunch of these little incursions that the Russians have come out looking like they won, which has increased his popularity. It's possible the Ukraine invasion may have been planned as one of these. And my feeling about that is Putin was not Sauron was clearly um, not aware of who he was dealing with. I mean, Ukrainians by at this point are not pushovers, and I mean never really have been. They were in a position earlier where they were not able to fight back so effectively, but at this point, to think that he could have just a quick incursion was wrong. I mean, and he's tried it again in 2022, which really makes me think he's not, well, he's enthralled to his ideology at the expense of reality. Anyway, so it's the theory of Elizabeth Wood is that it's a series of, and this was supposed to be just another quick, in and out that would make him look like big man on campus and would increase his popularity. There were plans to invade a large part of Ukraine. Including actually taking Kyiv, however, in circulating in Moscow already in December 2013. So obviously there were two schools of thought about what they were going to try to do. There were also calls to destabilize and create events to justify the invasion while Yanukovych was still in office. If true, it means that the planned dismemberment of Ukraine, the planning had happened long before Yanukovych's ouster. So that even with Yanukovych still there, he was being used as a patsy, basically to set it up so that Russia would have an excuse to come storming into Ukraine and dismember it. And that doesn't fit the short and victorious war scenario. So who knows? I mean, well, this is sort of mind reading. It's hard to mind read a maniac, or a sick, well, no, an evil person. Let's say that. Okay. So in this theory, this is really just a part of a deliberate strategy of Russian territorial expansion, which they had done over centuries. The empire. Anyway, back to you, Adam. Muted mic, perhaps.
Exactly. I pressed the button and didn't confirm, which means I didn't press the button. I attempted to. But I think the short, victorious war, quote unquote, was to some extent accomplished with the annexation of Crimea, which caused one of his highest domestic approval ratings during his regime. So, just saying.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. I mean, it may just have been too. You know, he's a megalomaniac. He may have just said, "Well, that was so easy. Let's do even more. I'll be even more popular after I've taken over so much more of Ukraine." Who knows? Yeah. Um, so
It
apparently,
almost seems like through this, he at every point expected the Ukrainians to be more nationalist and more like radical, and so when Ukrainians just sort of kept it fairly democratic and chill, and as far as revolutions go, there was no hanging of of people from lamp poles or anything, which would have any of that kind of stuff would have given them carte blanche to go after it, but they overall kept it very very you know d- ideal centric, I guess. Go ahead, Lexicon.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's right. And like you can see in all these leaks that he writes about that they've clearly got this plan to instigate what do we call these things? What do you do when you come in and you provocations? I don't know what's the matter. Yes. So to instigate provocations, and as you're saying, the Ukrainians aren't provoked, or they're not provoked into doing stupid things. But what is amazing, and what I guess that Wynnyckyj here should be rather pleased that he really is. All the other books we've read most of the others are books that were written with the knowledge of 2022. But he's writing this stuff, and these are the signs that people saw. Well, now, in hindsight, it's clear to us that this plan to take over at least the whole land bridge, the whole east and south, right over to Odessa and to Moldova, that these plans were there. And I mean, yeah, it was. He says surely doing the whole thing was not would not have been a short, quick war. But as a matter of fact, that's exactly what they thought they could do. And so I would say that I think he makes this clear that Putin and company thought that with Yanukovych, with their man Yanukovych, they could do their various provocations. Yanukovych, of course, according to the playbook, was supposed to make this appeal from his from this conference in Kharkiv, I guess, yeah, which is kind of his base, and call for the assistance of Orkland, and Putin was very disappointed all in all. First of all, Yanukovych didn't put the protests down, and then he got all hot and bothered and ran away. And by this time, Putin wouldn't even have him. It's a wonder that I just laugh to think what under what conditions he must live in the great fatherland. But I mean, nobody is so despised as a fool by other fools. But yeah, so he didn't fill the bill. He didn't do the job. He didn't get the job done, and they just carried on with their plans. So they took the initial steps. Very unsatisfactory. We've seen in other books Gherkin complaining that he couldn't find 1,000 good, dissatisfied Ukrainians who wanted to rise up with him and create an anti-Kiev army. So, yeah, it's a fascinating story to read with the knowledge that they never faltered. They didn't pause for a moment. They went this far in 2014, 15, 16, and until date of publication, which I notice in chapter 7, I guess, that he goes to press when the candidates for the new presidential election of May 2019 are known, but have just become known. And of course, the outcome cannot be forecast at all. And but that we all know that this stuff just there's the playbook. And you just look at the series of provocations and leaks and speeches and brilliant theoretical backgrounders produced by the great Führer. And I mean, you can see it all coming. Now we can see it all coming. Too bad, we couldn't then. But basically, Ukraine is tied to its stake, and this stuff, they're just preparing the fire for all the succeeding, for the next 10 years. And then they finally do it. But, and you're quite right, they underestimated every single time just how Ukrainians would respond, neither as stupidly, but nor at all. They are neither going to be. They were not. Russia could not get a rise out of the Ukrainians, but when they do finally invade, Ukrainians will not roll over. So it's pretty fascinating the perspective that we get out of this.
Yeah, and one of the things that we know now too. I mean, Ukrainians from 2014 on were preparing for an eventual Russian invasion. They knew it was likely to happen. There were people started, they started rebuilding. I mean, well, they started rebuilding the army a- as soon as Yanukovych was out. But Ukrainians all over the country, what they did on on weekends was learn to be combat medics, to learn first aid, to learn survival skills, that kind of thing. The entire country started preparing in 2014, and so they knew what was coming. I mean, I'm sure they hoped it wouldn't, but they knew that they needed to be prepared. Ukrainians have had a lot of experience in dealing with Russians. Um, yeah, and as you were saying too, I mean, it really is an incredible credit to, you know, just um, your basic ordinary Ukrainian that they didn't the Russians were trying to gin up this Russian speakers versus Ukrainian speakers thing, hoping to have attacks on Russian speakers so they could have an excuse to come in and save the day. It never happened. And as he says, even in all of the skirmishes, the Ukrainian side did everything possible to avoid violence. There were provocations again and again and again, as Lexicon was saying, that were just not responded to. And that it's as I said, it's a real statement of the strength of Ukrainian civil society and of the basic morality of just normal Ukrainians. That they did not respond in the way the Russians expected, because the Russians expected them to respond the way Russians would, and Ukrainians are not Russians, thank God. Um, anyway, okay. So, okay, so as we're talking about, it was likely that the original Novorossiya plan was to have Yanukovych ask for Russian assistance after the climax of protests in Kiev, but because Yanukovych was too timid to address the Kharkiv Party of Regions conference in February 2014, that didn't happen. That was, they were supposed to be a backlash. He was supposed to ask for help. Um, and I like this hashtag, Adam.
Hashtag said he's Zidane saved the Ukrainian state, because he was the leader of Maidan and Kharkiv, and it seems to have come up a few times. And I feel like this was a historical nexus, this meeting that Yanukovych did not attend because his safety could not be guaranteed, was maybe the linchpin that didn't give Volya his justification he needed to attack while Yanukovych was still in control, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, that seems to have been, it seems that the Russians were sort of trying to goad Yanukovych on into, and then after that, the fake Luhansk and Donetsk republics leaders into asking for Russian intervention, and they were really not very successful. They certainly weren't successful with Yanukovych. I don't know why. I mean, Yanukovych does not strike me as someone who's going to would stand on principle, but there was something that made him not willing to totally sell out his country in the last moment. I mean, he did enough, but he didn't. completely. So Plan B, which was the fostering rebellion through these hybrid means, that also failed. Um, and in addition, the invasion forces are not greeted with open arms by the Russian speakers, which is what they really expected. Instead, the Kremlin was now faced with, as Wynnyckyj calls it, a belligerently defensive independentist neighbor on its western border, which I just think is a lovely turn of phrase. Belligerently defensive independentist neighbor on its western border. So, but they still didn't learn. So Putin and the Russian ended up with 7% of Ukrainian territory rather than half the country, which is what Putin had been after to start with. Which is, was not a perfect outcome, but certainly better than it could have been. The next section is called Improvising Novorossiya. And anybody who speaks Russian, if I'm not pronouncing that right, you can let me know, although, as I said, I really don't care very much with Russian. Anyway, March 1st, 2014, the Federation Council of the Russian Federation authorized the deployment of troops to Ukraine. And you will note this was after they'd already invaded Crimea. So apparently, they fixed it up after the fact. Although all those little green men were supposedly, no one knew where they came from. Although they were clearly FSB troops. Anyway, so the question is whether this authorization of deployment of troops uh, was after Crimea, but it may have also been preparatory to the return, in quotes, of Kharkiv, Luhansk, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa, which is how Putin had redefined Novorossiya, the return, as they call it, to Russia, the invasion and annexation. There was a plan to foment unrest, followed by a request of local governments for Russian military assistance. This failed because they didn't. There was less unrest than they had hoped for, and as I said before, Donetsk and Luhansk, they didn't actually ask for intervention. So this left these two rump republics in eastern Donetsk and Luhansk. Um, the planning to create this Novorossiya likely started much earlier, perhaps in 2013, and he bases this on the fact that there were military exercises in Belarus at that time that the storyline that they were using in these military exercises fit very closely to what would have been in an invasion into Donetsk and Luhansk, into that area. So this is very possible. It's a theory. The theory of this is based on a internal contradiction of all of these theories, really. On the one hand, they talk about Putin as though he's a master strategist, but on the other hand, these plans were all foiled by the ineptitude of Yanukovych, which wouldn't seem to be something that a master strategist would have done. And you point out another reason, Adam, here.
And the unexpected strength of Kharkiv Maidan. So therefore, hashtag Zaidan, save the Ukrainian state.
Yeah, and in the next chapter, I believe it is, we do talk about about the work of Serhiy Zaidan and others in Kharkiv that made it so that the attempt to make a Kharkiv People's Republic fell flat. So yeah, Serhiy Zaidan had something to do with this for sure. He was the leader of the Maidan in Kharkiv. It's interesting too because Kharkiv is one of the most Russian-speaking cities in Ukraine. So it is a place that the Russians figured would go all in for being part of Russia, and they didn't at all. Um, anyway, and hey, look at that right here. What Wynnyckyj says. This is a quote. Putin's greatest miscalculations seems to have been the result of misunderstanding. In contrast to their portrayal by Russian historiography as a quote brotherly people unquote, Ukrainians proved themselves to be fundamentally different from Russians. And what he means by that is instead of choosing political unity with Russians, Ukrainians, even in the southeast, the Russian speaking areas refused. They did not agree to be passive pawns in a geopolitical game between great powers. And this defiance was seemed to have been unexpected by the Russians because as I've said before, they seem to be so taken up with their ideology they couldn't see what they were actually dealing with. Ukrainians were not ready to be anybody's puppets. They had values and interests they believed were worthy of defense, particularly post Maidan. Um, and okay, so the question is why? What changed? Why was Ukraine at this point? Um, Part of it actually was leaderless agency. There wasn't the great leader who was going to save everyone. These were individual, ordinary Ukrainians who took matters into their own hands and worked together. Um, so the and additionally, popular unrest and mass resistance were not new for Ukraine. But this Maidan was fundamentally different because there was no charismatic opposition leader. There was no centralized advertising or PR structures the way there was, for example, in the Orange Revolution, and that was one of the reasons the Orange Revolution. Well, they speak about it as being sort of a dress rehearsal for Maidan. The Orange Revolution was led by Viktor Yushchenko and his party, and people trusted Yushchenko to make everything right, and everybody went home. And it didn't turn out that way. So the next, during Maidan, the Ukrainians were not interested in having a charismatic leader. They were interested in taking care of it themselves, basically. And the imagery and slogans and all this, they appeared spontaneously. They weren't. It wasn't a top down thing. They were looking. What they were demand. Their demands were idealistic demands, not materialist. They wanted dignity, community, fairness, transparency, and rights. And he points out, and then I'll get to you, Lexicon, that one of the things that is really striking about this is that materialist demands got so little play, even though the entrepreneurial middle class, the nation entrepreneurial middle class, which was growing in Kiev at that time, was an alternative elite that represented a distinct economic group. But even that economic group was not looking for economic benefits. They were committed to these idealistic demands as well. Go ahead, Lexicon.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. These analytical chapters, I do find myself from time to time parting ways with Mychailo here, our good friend. I think he attempts to bring a lot of theory into this analysis, and there's all kinds of these various characters who have theories of revolution and stuff. And he uses words like materialist and idealist, and he's going to go on and talk about class in chapter 8, and I've got into it a bit. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he'd say that he goes his own path, he departs from some of the classical understandings, but I think in a way his evidence and that of other writers that we've read doesn't uh it goes does not go towards holding his theory up. I think the fact that the Orange Revolution failed, failed because they just agreed to place everything in the hands of a trusted leader and the old folks' generation, and they all just went home again. What that shows us is they learned that that's not the way to do it, and that you need to participatory revolution. And I think that the leadership has to come from more than, I agree that it's not one great orator. And he often comes back to this idea of, I think maybe it's in chapter 7, talking about how under Hannah Arendt and other theories of the revolutions, this great leader appears. I don't see that that's such a necessity for the definition. But what it seems to me that I learned from my observation, learned from reading since then, other people. I'm going to really like it if we do Chevelle and what's her name, Popova. Because they do a compact analysis that doesn't have to go into all these theoretical meanderings to attempt to make a point, but does help you see what forces in society are working. But it seems to me what happens is that not that there's this that spontaneity has to be elevated. I have a lot of friends who think this way. Something is legitimate only if it's totally spontaneous. I guess that's because what? The people have to be so pissed off that they all spontaneously have the same idea. I mean, that's a bit like a mob in or a jungle or something. Seems to me that what Ukrainians are learning is how to organize themselves better and better. We've read about the independence generation and how this younger generation was not going to be satisfied 10 years down the line to leave everything in the hands of the big leaders who were successful. And each of these movements, each of the Maidans goes further, goes deeper into the population, goes further in bringing a new generation of leadership, as we heard somebody say a couple of weeks ago. And so I don't think leadership is absent. We know of a number of names. We have some ideas. You could see a little bit. I mean, I'd love to know more, but at any rate, and I'd love to talk to people about this. You could see a bit of the emergence, and we see now and then we hear about what some of these big names, the guy who in 2013, who called out the protests, and in fact, Mustafa Nayam. In fact, he was a cabinet minister and resigned a few weeks ago because of some disagreements. But we see where those people have gone, Hannah Hopko, a number, and these people were leadership that was emerging. Some people were like NIAM, the group of investigative journalists, were emerging as leaders in the media and press world, uh, and were respected when they said, "Hey, I'm going down to Independence Square. Who's coming with me?" And like won't do it. Show up. And so they were known leaders. I think through Maidan further, you need a lot of leaders to get to do this kind of thing. Um, I've seen a
I think
similar,
it's a bit semantic though, lexicon. Like I think he's saying the same thing as you. Like he mentions Nayam and others. Like it,
yeah,
it's not like there were no leaders. There always has to be someone who takes charge to do a thing. But it wasn't like there was a paternalistic top down. I mean, feel like Hritsyak may have expressed this portion of Maidan better maybe
yeah.
than Mychailo does,
I think
but
so. I think,
anyways,
well,
I
he is trying to
interrupted. Go
get
ahead.
a little too semantic, and to me the elevation of the creating a making a virtue of spontaneity, I just generally disagree with it. I was just remembering, as we think about this, in 2012 what we had was red squares here. We had these big student protests in Montreal that started in it was post-secondary students opposing a big hike in tuition fees that are famously low in Quebec, and this movement lasted for months and went on through the winter and right into spring. And you could see various factions within it. You could see leaders emerge. People know where they are now. We know they were, had affinities with different political parties. Anyway, to me, Maidan was much like that movement that I saw, and I've watched others in the course of my many years. But yeah, I think that it's important to recognize that it's just important to me because I've also seen it again when people talk about Belarus and what I've seen lately in Georgia. And people, to me, in Belarus, they didn't have enough experience. They didn't have the extent of experience Ukrainians had, or they didn't have enough leadership type people who had learned lessons from earlier times. I mean, this is one of the first times they ever did massive protests, and they didn't know how to. When Putin sent the goons in and lopped off all anybody who stuck their head above the gates, uh, they didn't have a way to cope with that. The Ukrainians knew this was coming and they fought back. I mean, they actually did organize themselves. And I mean, there was a certain, as of January, there were people already trying to arm themselves. And even in Winter on Fire, we see them tearing up the cobblestones. When I arrived April. It was astonishing how much the cobblestone still hadn't been relayed. It was amazing that by October they were back again. But you see footage in that movie, I think, or certainly we have all seen it, of them tearing up stuff to build barricades and to have projectiles. And we know that there were groups that attempted to set up some sort of a fight back because they knew the violence was going to happen. And all the other things, not sleeping in the same house 2 nights in a row and moving around, protecting the leadership. Also in Georgia, I was worried the whole time, and I remain very worried. To me, Georgia again is probably more experienced than the Belarusians were, but there was a great deal of promotion of how wonderfully spontaneous it was, and I just thought, my God, I used to phone call up you guys and talk about how concerned I was that Putin's not going to let Georgia go. It's too strategic place, and their president has talked like this. And to me, yeah, they may lose this in part because it's very difficult to have the experience, the knowledge, and the sort of, as you're saying, Adam, dispersed. Leadership that can protect itself and rise to fight again re reappear, come out of the woodwork, hide out in the suburbs, things like that, to come back and keep on organizing this movement. And just a final point, I see by their appeal to the international community to help them that there's not an awful lot of there are very few tools in their hands. So I just wanted to say, I think that we see Ukraine was at a point of maturity of this people's movement. And later on, I'm going to argue with him a bit again, but I mean, he does basically have the idea. Basically, this is a national independence, national liberation movement. That's what's going on. And in chapter 7, I think he's going to talk about that. And in that case, you get alliances that might be strange alliances in another kind of like a labor conflict or something. But in the case of a national liberation movement, you've got alliances going through the structures of society, and people from every stratum can, if they wish, if they're built forging a nation, as he's saying, can stand on the side of their nation. Sometimes unlikely prospects. Anyway, some of my thoughts on this theoretical issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Lexicon. I think as Adam said, I think some of your disagreement is more semantic, and I think Wynnyckyj taught he uses the word anarchic, which I think is not the right word for it, as you're saying, but he does also point out that there was what he calls a horizontal or communitarian model of leadership that individuals banded together in small groups and accomplished specific facts, and those leaders did talk to each other. So I think it's he may have overstated things to make a point, but yeah, there were leaders. It's just it was not one, as Adam said, one patriarchal leader at the top who was telling all of his underlings what to do. I think that was the point that he was trying to make. Um, and okay, so and then you have a
Yeah, that's very legitimate. Yeah.
hey, Adam, I think you had a thought here.
Yeah, the optimist in me wants to think of Maidan as an evolution in human society, but the pessimist in me wants to buy hundreds of copies of this book on freedom and on tyranny and coerce everyone I know not reading them, probably with cookies or yard work favors. I'm not very diabolical.
But I think that's true. I mean, I think that he makes a very strong argument for the fact that the Revolution of Dignity was one of the great revolutions, as was the French, the Russian, or the American Revolution. But it only has an effect on people if they have understood and integrated those ideas, and a lot of it is, as you're saying, coming out of on freedom and on tyranny. Um, yeah, one of the things that he mentions about this that does that is a point that Snyder makes, is the fact that that a lot of this was sort of unpredictable, which made it harder for Russia to respond and made it more difficult for Yanukovych to respond when all this was happening. And Snyder points out that unpredictability is actually a sign of freedom. That it's predictable being predictable means being under the thumb of some outside forces. Unpredictability is something that's a marker of freedom. So but yes, I still have 3 copies of On Tyranny. I buy them in bulk, hand them out to people. So I have 3 copies. I have to find a couple of not victims, a couple of recipients, because this is a message that has to be said again and again and again. People have to understand that they have to take their own agency, as the Ukrainians have done. That you can't sit back and let other people do things for you if you want to remain free. That you have to do it for yourself, and and especially in our countries, Canada and the United States, it's awfully comfortable, and it's awfully, if you don't take responsibility, probably not too terribly bad things are going to happen, because there are a lot of other people taking care of it. But that's the road to autocracy, is when people stop feeling as though they have a responsibility and they have the need to take that agency upon themselves and be active in determining what the future is going to be. All right. So anyway, so we talked about the local leaders and small networks connecting to each other, and providing. This also was the same thing that happened in the East when hostilities began. This is how defense and logistics were provided, not by a centralized authority, but by small groups of leaders contacting each other. Um, and as he says, and I think this is true, the glue was ideational, meaning, it was commitment to those demands: dignity, community, fairness, transparency, rights, protection of their country. Those are the things that motivated people. It was not the attractiveness of a leader, a personality of a leader. Um, and what's interesting is that the structures that were developed here, in on the Maidan and in the East with prosecuting the war, that a lot of the structures could easily have just been temporary, but they seem to have endured, which I think has part to do with the transformation of Ukrainian society. That way of um, of organizing society remained, not totally, but to some large extent. And this is a fundamental change in the way social movements are organized and achieve aims. This was something new with the Ukrainian Revolution. Um, Grassroots mobilization, idealistic solidarity, are the two issues that will be dealt with in the next chapters. Okay, let's just see here. Okay, so the glue of the solidarity, well, there were 2 things. There was the grassroots idea of a nation, as distinctive from a state, too. Ukrainians are famously not all that enamored of their state apparatus, but of their nation. They're very committed. And Adam, I think you wanted to uh, support that.
Yeah, I was just going to say those. I felt this viscerally in my interactions with Ukrainians when I was there. I don't know about you, but and also, I volunteered with LVK, Lviv Volunteer Kitchen, and they started in 2013, 14 during Maidan on the Lviv version of Maidan, and a few ladies decided to help out by cooking a bunch of food, and that for the protesters at the time, and that once the conflict started, evolved into cooking for guys at the front, and so there's an example right there that this unexpected, what was the word, that spontaneous meeting in during Lviv Maidan spawned a a volunteer organization that has had hundreds of foreigners come and chop vegetables for them in Lviv, if not thousands, I should say, over the last 3 years, and everything else, and it's still going. And there's an example.
Yeah, very true. A great example. They do tremendous work too. Um, Yeah, and I had that experience too, Adam. Ukrainians are very suspicious of government. I didn't find in my Ukrainian friends that anybody was. I mean, there were people who grudgingly say, yeah, they didn't. I mean, especially in Lviv, which is not exactly Zelensky centric. But the most I got from people saying, I didn't vote for him, but he really has acquitted himself well, and I support him now. But that existed in the same person who's deeply committed to Ukraine and deeply committed to the nation surviving. Yeah, so that was exactly my experience too. The government, not so much, but they'll put up with the government because they need that to protect the state. I think is really what the nation the nation being the people and the people and the country and the land. Those are the things that Ukrainians are really committed to, and they'll put up, like I said, they'll put up with the government because that's what you need in order to do that. Um, okay, so there with that, the glue of the solidarity was the idea of nation, and the second thing was a lot of the local leaders were from this new creative class of self-reliant urban bourgeois. um, and he says these new trends in organizational development are of possible global civilizational importance. Could be. I'm not a sociologist. I don't know. I mean, I think that it certainly made a huge difference in Ukraine. And these, this self-reliant urban bourgeois classes he's talking about, it provided a lot of in the first years after, well, we're sort of in the first years after Maidan. So there were a lot of independent business people who put their businesses on hold, and went into government service because of their commitment to the ideals of the Maidan. So this did make a big difference in what happened post Maidan. Um, okay, the next section is called revolutionary idealism. Um, um, so as he points out, and I've never thought of this before, and it really is very true. A revolution is a process, not a moment. A process It's a process of transformation can be accelerated by revolutionary events, but is not limited to a single event. The revolution of dignity, he says, its first stage was Yanukovych's departure, but it actually continues, and I think this is true up until now. I think it continues up until now. The continuing work on rooting out corruption, the work on all levels of society, on bringing those Maidan ideals to realization. So, a revolution um, is something that takes place over perhaps a long period of time. As I said before, he argues that the Revolution of Dignity is one of the great revolutions with historical importance comparable to the French or American revolutions, but it's closer to the American in one very important aspect, which was there was no reign of terror after the revolution. There were questions about what's going to happen after, when the soldiers come back from the Eastern Front, meaning the front with Russia in this case. Are they going to go after all of the apparatchiks who were in the Yanukovych government? Is it going to be bloodbath with calling all these people to account with a mob calling them to account, as happened in the French Revolution, certainly happened in the Russian Revolution. It did not happen in the American Revolution, and it didn't happen here either. And he says perhaps the idealist core was not contaminated by populist materialism. Okay, yes, Adam.
Calling lexicon. Calling lexicon. Can we discuss what he means by populist materialism for my tiny tradesman brain before we move forward?
Jeepers, how would I know? This guy makes this stuff up. uh, because like populist, I guess we know what he means by populist. Well, like, although I guess he sort of probably treats it as well, it's legit sort of mob, calling upon the mob and so on. He really hates anything material because he thinks that the word materialism means that only material stuff matters. Or you saw how earlier there you were saying there were no materialist demands. People weren't demanding a wage increase. That's not what materialism actually classically is supposed to mean. And the big distinction between Hegelian and Marxian, excuse me, sorry, Marx appreciated Hegel's use
Bless you.
of dialectic. I'm quite a mess here, especially this poor old healing left eye of mine. But anyway, I think all these multi drops probably go down through my eyes into the rest of my head. But so, the idea of dialectic is nothing mysterious. It's more or less Hegel very strongly showed how forces, countervailing forces, affect each other, and Marx drew his understanding of dialectics from Hegel. But Hegel was an idealist as opposed to materialist in the sense, and when Marx said he stood him on his head, because Hegel saw the driving force coming out of some ideal, some God idea, some, I don't know, but anyway, some ephemeral idea that was at the power, at the source of things. And what Marx did that was very appealing and has been appealing to historians, not to say revolutionary since then, is that he said that people's ideas come from the very real, in a very real way, from the way they go about getting their lives. And poor people have to get their lives out of the ground, and people, particularly, he saw that workers are dependent on people. They get their lives out of work in a factory setting where all they have is each other, and they have no ownership of what they're using. And there are people who are, and the capitalist class, they own the means of production. So what he's talked about is there's a material reality to the perspective you have in your life, and it's not a surprise that there tends to be, that there can be a certain perspective on the corn laws or something that comes out of the poor, the people, and another perspective that comes out of the traders in corn, and this sort of stuff. Anyway, it's badly misunderstood, and I think Wynnyckyj just uses the word material to mean anything that's base. And a material good, a thing, anything that has to do with money. And I don't think it's a proper way of using it. I wouldn't scratch my head that much if I think he's tossing in two ideas and making himself a portmanteau idea. But I think that, yeah, he doesn't like. He doesn't know what materialist philosophy is, and particularly, and what he knows of it, he doesn't like. So he's probably adding to his distaste for populism by throwing in another distasteful word, materialism. That's all I can think of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds right to me too. I don't know this stuff very well, but it does seem as though he's just using this as a catchphrase for everything he doesn't like. Populism, as I understand it, really is when your rank and file everyday person, that would they turn en masse against the elites. I mean, is that way off base lexicon?
I think so, and it's a politician who appeals, like, the famous ones in our mind, the memes are Eva Peron, or the Peronists, her husband and her, that and it's Donald Trump, and it's Boris Johnson, and it's like, any one of a number of people, and if mainly their appeal is to kind of the people as a mob. It's an appeal to them in that sense, not to give them agency, but to use them and to pander, I suppose, to any sort of idea if it'll excite. It's the circuses part of bread and circuses, but I don't think, at any rate. So there could be populism in I mean, Zelensky's coming to power was a wave of populist enthusiasm, and, I don't think Zelensky has particularly built a party well, I know he hasn't built a party structure any more than any other one of the leaders, but, a lot of Ukrainian politics is kind of stalled at the stage of semi-populism. So, I would watch out before slinging around a lot of insults. I think that I was mentioning it just briefly the last week. The process of building some kind of actual sort of participatory party politics of a democracy is kind of tough and lots of it's very tough in a lot of countries, and I hope that some that sort of process of building popular participation in political formations will develop in Ukraine, but I don't think it's guaranteed, but I think it would be valuable. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's I'm thanks for the explanation. I get this is, as I said, something I'm not really that familiar with. Um, but I think that I know that there are still issues of patronal politics in Ukraine also, and this in part is because the development has been stalled a bit by the fact that they have to fight this a war, a genocidal war at the moment. But anyway, okay, so we are on to um, natural. Well, we talked about the natural lifestyle of revolutions and this reign of terror that is often the case. Um, but This yes, this never happened. There was disappointment in the pace of change and the slowness of reforms and very dire economic conditions during part of this time. But he says the prevailing public discourse remained idealistic, and there was no coming to power of radicals, and that I think is a big thing. It was really the moderates who were in charge much of the time. Um, Adam, you have a note here.
I sure do. Um, yeah, the election of a moderate Jewish Russian speaking Zelensky after the publication of this book only adds to this argument because, I mean, lexicon's right. It was a wave of what you could call populism to bring him to power, but the way that he conducts himself, he doesn't now is not is like his communication is always very measured and accurate and is not in any way what we would um, characterize as populist in terms of riling people up and saying things that someone might want to hear that isn't necessarily very accurate.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now I am going to, some of this I think I'm going to skip because we've actually dealt with it. In Ukraine, one of the things he points out that as in the American Revolution, there was not this reign of terror. And part of it is because decolonization had to remain the focus even after the beginning of Maidan because they're still fighting against the colonial power. Um, so the, he gives us the three main issues that the Revolution of Dignity was about. He says national liberation, which was the completion of the decolonization process that started in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union. Defeudalization, revolt against corrupt neo-feudal oligarchic regime, demand for safety from the police, etc., and a voice in decision making. And this he gets from Hannah Arendt, novel values and practices, which I find this terminology a little bit odd. But anyway, what he means by that, and this is from Hannah Arendt, is the declaration of the dignity of the person through organization and interdependency. He says Ukrainians made a unique contribution to the world's civilizational development by showing new forms of horizontal solidarity and active citizenship. Indeed, he says, it may be this third social process that the Kremlin found sufficiently threatening to warrant being crushed by military aggression. And I think, I think that rings.
And I would add that our elites and oligarchs also are a little bit scared of us getting a little bit like that overall. Just saying.
Yes, I think that is absolutely true. I mean, it's spontaneity that Snyder says is a mark of freedom. Having an electorate that spontaneously chooses not necessarily to go the way that the people in power, the way that they're pointing, is a frightening thing for those people, whether you're in the United States or Canada or Russia. You know. Anyway, so with that, folks, we have finally gotten to the end of chapter 7. We are now going on to chapter 8, which we will not complete this week, called A National Revolution. Okay, so this was both a social revolution and, as he calls it, also really a birth of a nation. I see Lexicon's hand up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I just noticed that I'd made a note in my book in the last few pages of the chapter, so I didn't want to leave it before, because tweaked a memory there. Back on 234, when we were talking about there was no radical development, no radical leader came to power. And there's a point at the end of that chapter and going on to 235, he says I mean, the invasion was a big reason that a lot of other things didn't go on, and the pace of social reform, domestic reform, was slow. He says national defense was prioritized over domestic institutional reform, and so a mimetic drift to existential politics, and he's quoting somebody, subordinating political discourse and decision making to the exigencies of warding off external threat occurred. Well, that's one of the groups. I don't know if he mentions it. There's this NGO grouping with an unwieldy name, and it's I don't know, the Consolidated Grouping for Reform. Anyway, that group with the long name became, I think he did talk about it, um, became a contributor of many of the ideas for reform. But so many of them, particularly in the area of justice, but also agricultural land reform and so on, did not get anywhere. There's trouble getting going. Well, one reason is because there's a war on. But I remember, and this was in the fall of 2014, in October when I was there, and because of contacts from Ukrainians here in Canada, I was asking women friends to hook me up with women they knew in NGOs. And I remember these women, really strong feminists, totally doing work with the displaced population. But they were really, one of them is a woman I often mention who I just saw on Facebook today. She's got her pilot's wings. She's one of the people who instigated the women in combat positions in the army and also popularizing drone piloting. But now she's a real pilot too. But anyway, I remember one woman saying to me that in that constituted grouping, whatever it was called, for reform, she said, we try to raise women's issues and they say, look, we've got a war on, we'll deal with that afterwards. So feminist reform, and in fact, the women did not shut up about it, but there just really was this. I sure recognized it when he said that. And so I think that was one of the areas. There probably were other areas. So that was an excuse not to make certain reforms that you just didn't like, or they were hard, or you didn't agree with them, because we got a war on. And that certainly, now it looks like a pretty small war compared to what they're dealing with now. And yet, as we show over and over again, they've probably begun to move faster in the areas of some reforms like anti-corruption and so on. precisely because when there's a war on, you cannot go around tolerating corruption. And similarly, you can't go around tolerating, sexism, mistreatment of women, or whoever else. And so I just thought it was very interesting to see. I mean, he observed it then, and I had people telling me that that kind of thing was happening. It's very interesting.
Yes.
And a change. I think the larger war has led to, I bet he'd agree, to a faster pace, of course, of social reform because of the demands placed on the stresses, the pressures on everybody. And what's so winning about Ukraine is that they see that as a reason to reform faster, to undertake more reform, not to put it off.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I get the feeling that at least in Ukraine that a lot of people are feeling that this is a serious time. There's serious things going on. We have no time to pussyfoot around with this. We'll stand up and demand what's right and demand that our government do it. And I think we're seeing the results of that. That people just are not willing. They're seeing more than ever where they want to be and where they want to be when this war is over and where they want to be generally, and that is with the European Union, in NATO, and a law-based, rules-based society that is fair to everyone. And they just are not willing to put up with the crap anymore. And I think it's a wonderful thing. It really is pretty amazing that, in the Ukrainian, the central government, I mean, they do push back. They do get a little bit autocratic at times, but they're not. You don't see a lot of, shut up and do what we're told because we're in the middle of a war. I think that really the government is really acting quite well. It's not perfect, and we know that Ukrainska Pravda, for example, has had some problems with lack of access because of unpopularity. And I heard a couple of other things recently about people who suddenly got mobilization orders after they'd criticized the government. So it's not perfect, but it is out in the open, and people are really working on it. And as you say, even in during the war, if anything, the demand for change is accelerated, which is really pretty astonishing. Um, Okay. Now, in the opening of this chapter, which is called "The National Revolution," Wynnyckyj talks about going home one night late from the Maidan, and he would ride the long escalator down in the Independence Square metro station, which I'm so pleased to have been in, and I know what he's talking about. It's a very long escalator, goes deep underground, and as he is going down the escalators, he sees a group of young women singing the Ukrainian national anthem, and as they continue to go down. He sees several hundred people have been waiting quietly in the underground platform, stood in attention, and also began to sing. And he's saying, this is key. No one ever sang the national anthem spontaneously here. And what he got out of that was, as he said, it was the birth of a nation. There was he quotes Katya Gorchinskaya, who was actually Russian-speaking deputy editor of the Kiev Post, about this. She said, "This is about a nation being born. Mutilated by years of misrule, impoverished by looting, it emerges slowly from the ruin. This process of is massive, and we don't know how well this birth is going to go, but it is happening now and here in Kiev, and it's both painful and awesome. The only place to truly feel the pain and grandeur of this national awakening is to stand there right on Maidan." And it was true. I mean, this was truly a revolutionary moment. Adam, go over to you.
Yeah, and it's really disappointing to me that more Westerners aren't inspired by Ukraine's struggle to emerge from a corrupt totalitarian past. Ukrainians fight for our way of life, and most of us, you know, present company excluded, are blind to it as we zombie march into authoritarianism and algorithmic predictability. If you're asking me, we were handed the keys to a kingdom that I don't think we understand, and that most of us think that should maintain itself. And here Ukrainci are providing such an amazing example of how to be democratic citizens, and yeah, gas prices and stuff. So, bike lanes and chicks with dicks, right? It's all very frightening.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. No, this is something I'm astounded by. I mean, what went on during the Revolution of Dignity and what continues to go on in Ukraine is a people fighting for quintessentially American values. If there's one country in the world that the United States should stand behind 100%, it's Ukraine. Because Ukraine is fighting a war of independence very similar to what we in the United States fought, and for all the same values. And yeah, it's extremely frustrating. It well, I mean, we've talked about this before, and you hear the Kremlin talking points trotted out again and again, which have no relation to what really is going on in Ukraine. And yeah, it's very frustrating. I God bless Razum for Ukraine. They really do try to get the word out. And this is something, all of us who are here, you need to talk to people around you. You need to call people when they spout misinformation, and often just not knowing. I mean, I remember 5, 10 years ago. I remember, oh yeah, Ukraine, that's that place, all those anti-Semites and all the pogroms, and it's a terrible place and whatever. And it was only when I started, well, first of all, I had several Ukrainian friends, which made me question whether what I had heard was true or not. And it was only when I started really looking into it that I realized how totally wrong my perceptions were, and these perceptions have been fed to us. This is the Russians have been working on this for a long time. I mean, since probably before 1991, even, and certainly thereafter. Their whole plan was that Ukraine would be independent for a few years and then would be dragged back in under the Russian yoke again. And it didn't happen, and they're permanently annoyed by that. Um, but yeah, it's very frustrating I think when we see the amount of support in the United States and in Canada for and in the UK and in Europe for Ukraine, more and more people are beginning to understand this, but it's still it's there's a way to go yet in educating people. Um, anyway, so in Ukraine at this point, we're talking about the post Maidan era. There was a wave of patriotism that spread through the country. This was something new, really. And as he said, the entire country turned blue and yellow. There was crowdfunding of hundreds of millions of hryvnia for clothing, food, and equipment for the front, which saved Ukraine, really. This chapter is going to examine what he calls the national dimension of the Revolution of Dignity. Um, and external observers misinterpreted the use of symbols, statements, and frequent displays of patriotism as part of what Ukrainian radicalism, or even a turn toward fascism, as it was what was misinterpreted by people who just didn't understand what they were looking at. In fact, this was not a reflection of nationalism, but rather patriotism. It was motivated by the idea of Ukraine, what it means to be Ukrainian. And many Ukrainians were giving this serious thought for the first time. And this is why I think he calls the birth of a nation. There was a very personal transformations were going on in a large number of Ukrainians during this period of time. Okay, this section now is called "Birth of a Nation." Um, Now it was generally accepted, and he didn't put it in quotation marks, but I might, that Ukraine was divided between the Russian-speaking East and the Ukrainian-speaking West. Yaroslav Hrytsak talked about this, and he says that this was an oversimplification that grossly misinterpreted Ukrainian realities and pointed to the fact how big a country Ukraine is. As Wynnyckyj points out, in Germany, Bavarians and Northern Germans are very different, but nobody questions whether they should be one country or not. And Hrytsak is saying here that the people in different areas of Ukraine had different attitudes, different languages. Listen to the Ukrainian that people speak up way up in the Carpathians, and compare that to what's spoken in Kiev, and you're not really hearing the same language. So the whole language business was really overblown and he's, as Hrytsak said, it was a dichotomy that never really existed. Ritsak says that really, if you're talking about numbers, it's more accurate to say 22 Ukraines rather than two, because of the amount of diversity. Each region has its own, is different, and is as legitimate Ukraine as any other part of it. And as we saw especially after the invasion of Crimea and the Donbass, this diversity did not lead to division. It really This whole idea of division was really pushed by Russian historiographic myths, which were pushed even in Ukrainian schools until the end of the Soviet Union. That Galician Volhynians in the west and Russians in the east. By the end of 2014, it had become patently obvious that Ukrainians were one people and proud of it. And this statistics, survey statistics, which he'll get to later, show this also. The foundation of a community are the agreement on national symbols, values, history, and a common feeling of belonging to a bounded citizenry, which is the same as in other European countries too. So this is what defined Ukraine. It was amplified in Ukraine, but the Maidan and the Russian invasion increased the people in Ukrainians more and more as a result of this invasion, as well as everything else. Um, Identified themselves increasingly as citizens of Ukraine rather than as anything else. This was the case except in the Donbass, where the last surveys were in 2014 because there were no access to Russian-controlled areas after that. But in the Donbass, there was an increased identification with the Soviet past. People identified themselves as citizens of the former USSR, resident of the region I live in. This unique Donbass identity and the reasons for it are going to be discussed later on in the chapter. This is something I hadn't known about. This actually was explained to me a little bit by someone I met in Ukraine who was in a tank unit in the east, and he said, I was saying, was talking about how unified Ukrainians were, and that my perception was there was less pro-Russian sentiment in the east than there might have been at one time, and he said, now basically that's not true. That in the Donbass, especially, there is a lot of identification with Russians, in part because people who identified as Ukrainians have left. This is not the case all over, of course, but anyway, it's a much more Donbass is a much more complex issue than I had realized up until that point when I spoke with him. Anyway, in the rest of Ukraine, then there was this new conceptualization of identity among large numbers of Ukrainians, and it was an organic bottom up process. This is not something that was pushed on people from the outside. Wynnyckyj says that perhaps part of the cause might have been the soft Ukrainization policies that were in effect, but that a lot of it um, was the result of identity introspection by a large number of people at the same time. Um, and Adam has another reason here.
Yes, existential threat by kleptocratic shithead neighbors could also be a factor.
Well stated. You should write a book. Yes. Yeah, there's nothing like, and this is one of the things I remember reading a rather touching poem that someone had written, writing about how what it would be like when peace comes. And one of the things she says, sort of, she talks about, being able to walk your child to school without worrying about it, sitting in the park, drinking coffee in the morning without air alerts and all this stuff. But then she says, and we'll be able to fight about, about internal things again. We'll be able to fight about politics. And it is true that some of this unity is a necessary thing in a war, and it will be a good day when Ukrainians don't have to be so united, when they can have disagreements and still all be part of one country. Anyway, now in this identity introspection, he's talking about one of the things which is was quite a change. Was it often came along with the decision to speak Ukrainian. Um, and this is including people who didn't speak it very well. They report that more Ukrainians in the later surveys reported Ukrainian as their native language, even when it was not the language of daily communication. So basically, people who spoke Russian and spoke Russian in their daily lives would consider Ukrainian their native language, their mother tongue, because as a marker of identity. The Ukrainian was the language of Ukraine. They were Ukrainians, therefore their native language was Ukrainian, even though they didn't necessarily speak it on a daily basis. I find that sort of fascinating. It's, as he says, that shows the dual functions of language. One of them was a means of communication, which for many people remained Russian because that was the language they were comfortable communicating with. But for many of those same people, it became a marker of identity that they are Ukrainian, so that their native language is Ukrainian, which I found really interesting because it's not easy to navigate in other than your native language. As probably people, there are probably some people here could testify even more than I can to that. But people are many Ukrainians um, are are um, are making the leap to speaking Ukrainian in daily life, even if it isn't as comfortable to start with. And even those who aren't are identifying with Ukrainian as their native language. Anyway, it's a beautiful language, so I commend I commend their choice. Much nicer language than Russian, in my humble opinion. Adam, we're doing it again. Your heart is blue and mine is yellow. It's so like, watch this. Isn't that great? We didn't even plan that. Anyway, okay. Identity revolution or evolution. He says revolution with brackets around with parentheses around the R. So, this was interesting. He's talking. He says Ukrainian identity was a process. And he has two examples of this. In 1991, he apparently spent some time in the then Dnipropetrovsk, which is now Dnipro. Although the oblast is still Dnipropetrovsk, so I have to find out why that's the case. Maybe too many signs to change. Anyway, it was renamed Dnipro as part of the decommunization project later on because Petrovsk is, I think, has something to do with some Russian. Anyway, let's go ahead.
I think it's similar to the Kirov name. There's later, or is it in this chapter when he explains the region so well, and so there's an area, and I hadn't heard of it, called Kirovsk, whatever. And I know the name Kirov. The Kirov Ballet, the Mariinska ballet was named Kirov. It was a sidekick of Lenin's who got assassinated, and people all over the Soviet Union had to go around naming things after him. But I think he explains in the book, and I also Googled it. He's right. It seems that you can change the names of everything, municipal level on down, below the oblast. But the oblast's names are in the constitution, so they have to have a constitutional reform to change the name of the oblast. So they change other things, but they're still getting around
Ah,
to changing the
thank you.
oblast
That's
names.
fascinating. That makes
It's
sense.
just north of Mykolaiv. I think I think there's a picture. Oh no, when you Google it, you can see where it is. But anyway, it's part of that central area. When he talks about the Zaporizhian Sich, the Cossacks, it was one of the oblasts that had a strong Cossack wild field sort of
Right,
heritage. Yeah,
Kirovhorod, yeah.
and then a few pages later, he gives you what they've renamed it
Interesting.
to.
Yeah, that's just fascinating. It's yeah. So I will put up with the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast for a while. They've got more important things to do than amend the Constitution to change the name of the oblast at this point. Okay, so he talks about a visit there in the city of what is now Dnipro in 1991, and he as one of these Canadian maximalist Ukrainian types, Adam, he goes into Dnipro, a massively large percentage of citizens are Russian speakers, and he walks around asking people what time it is in Ukrainian. Um, but he reports that 9 out of 10 were shocked by hearing Ukrainian come out of his mouth, and less than half seemed to even understand what he was asking, which is pretty amazing. Okay, that was the year of that was the year of independence, 1991. Um, it was Dnipro was primarily ethnically Russian at the time, but had been thoroughly Russified. In fact, many were in favor of federation with Russia after the fall of the USSR, although they did in the end vote for independence. So um, anyway, it's sort of interesting. So this is a contrast with 2014, when, as we spoke about before, Dnipro was really a hub of the of central hub of the resistance to the Russian invasion. They mobilized tremendous numbers of people. Ihor Kolomoisky, who was the I think he was the mayor and later governor of the oblast, gave quite a bit of his own personal money, probably stolen from somebody else, but we didn't know that at the time, to help outfit and set up the militias. Really saved a lot of eastern Ukraine. So anyway, so the example is okay in 2014. As I said, many volunteers in militias, and then the example he gives is there was a call for blood for a wounded defender that brought out several hundred volunteers, and he reports on the line where they're waiting. He says people in line spoke Ukrainian loudly and proudly, though with frequent errors in pronunciation and grammar. They sang the national anthem. They wore T-shirts with the trident, and many wrapped themselves in the blue and yellow flag. So, Dnipro had become a linchpin of the defense against Sauron's plans for Novorossiya. So that shows what this is part of the result of the Maidan process, and probably previously to that. But it's really, when you think about it, 1991 to 2014, that's not that much time, and there would have been a huge change in attitude. And this was not, it was not only in Dnipro. This happened all over the country. Um, and he says maybe Sauron, as I'm calling Butler these days, as Adam calls Hilo, um, it should be thanked for making Ukrainians realize nationhood. But in fact, the process began before the invasion. Adam.
But credit where credit is due, we can definitely thank Hoyla for helping catalyze it. We'll give them the benefit that they gave us a reminder of who they were and therefore who we are.
Yes, and as Darth Putin points out, everything going according to plan. I love Darth Putin. If you don't know Darth Putin, folks, go take a look at him. He's an absolute riot. Anyway, yeah, I think it's certainly the genocidal neighbor trying to come into your house is definitely going to make you want solidarity with your neighbors. Yeah. Um, Okay. So as you're saying, this process had started ahead of the invasion. For many activists on the Maidan, they experienced a kind of identity reset, which was often described as a spiritual thing, especially because of the fact that so many people others were going through the same process at the same time. I mean, this I guess is the kind of thing that you see with Christian revival movements in the United States were like this. It was a group of people who sort of encourage each other on. And in the case in Ukraine, many people were reaching the sort of the same conclusion at the same time, but they amplified each other's feelings because it was happening in a large group at the same time. And in this case, it was a really a wonderful thing. Um, the next section now is called independentism. And I'd just like to mention again, I see all sorts of our friends down there and listeners. Please don't feel, please come up and join us if you have anything to contribute. If you'd like to, I'm sure you all have something you could contribute. If you'd like to join us and join the discussion, it tends to be the four of us talking, which is fine. We enjoy talking to each other, but new voices and new ideas are always welcome at the same time. Okay, so we're now on to the section of the chapter called independentism, which is a word I had never heard. I think you might have made it up, but it's a good word anyway. Um, and the there's an irony he talks about that the revolution began with the declaration of unity with the EU, which is a political project which is aimed at downplaying nationalism as seen in the 20th century, which is rather ironic when you think about it, because what happened, what happened as a result of the of Yanukovych refusing to sign the association agreement with the EU was a very patriotic and a nationalist in the good sense awakening in Ukraine. So that is a little ironic. um, um, okay, so but as he points out, and I think this is true, the EU was a reaction to nationalism as we saw, for example, in Italy and in Germany, that kind of very negative nationalism, fascistic kind of approach. This had very little in common with what was emerging in Ukraine, which was a society that was very inclusive of multiple languages and ethnicity and present focused, non-etatist as he calls it, rejecting the state as the central institution of the nation, and as we've discussed in other times, and we'll talk about here too, the definition of who was Ukrainian was completely not ethnic, as it had been, for example, with the Nazis. That it didn't, when we look at who started the Maidan, it was Mustafa Naim, who was, I think, Afghani originally, and there was one other person who was from Belarus, and someone else Armenian. It was clearly not a movement of Ukrainian ethnic, nationalists. So as he said, this was um, this was not this what might have been a national movement, but it had very little in common with the kind of nationalism the EU was was put together to keep under control. So yeah, independence, but not necessarily in its instantiation in political structures. Sorry, Adam. Meaning that independence of the nation, but not that we like all the government structure is what that amounts to. Adam put put a note here.
Golly, thanks.
Oh, Adam, you're a riot. Anyway, no, I find I think lexicon called it. I mean, some of this wording is, he's been teaching in a university for too many years. So that's part of what happens with college professors after many years is they get this they get this convoluted language, which I think is used in part to snow people, to make them look like the big experts. I'm very jaded about this. Both my parents were college professors, so I've dealt with this my whole life. And you find it afterwards with some of these people; they don't know what the hell they're talking about, but boy, can they make it sound convincing. Anyway, but I digress.
Damn, you can't do that. You cannot justify my tradesmen prejudices against academics like that. That's not good for your outlook, buddy.
I'm sorry. Oh, that would make you a populist against your anti-elite. Anyway.
Oh no, I'm a populist. What happened?
Anyway, I mean, I mean, to be fair, I have also known many professors. Certainly, the people the wonderful people at NYU Law School who really knew their topic, and those are the people who really know their topic are the ones who can explain it so that a total moron like myself could understand what they were talking about. But anyway, um, Daniel, welcome. What would you like to tell us?
Привет, hello. Um, I noticed this topic was coming up, and it is very dear to my heart. I mean, second to saving the lives and dignity of Ukrainians, understanding their culture is one of the most important things, I think, because of all these lessons that you are discussing. And that's why in the comments, I added two sources that really helped me when I discovered them. One is a Ukrainska Pravda article discussing why Russians understand only force and have never been Ukraine's fraternal people. Now, okay, it's going to be academic, but let me just mention some points of why it's worth digesting. It discusses how there's a difference in vertical and horizontal power, and there's a difference in this sense of coercion. They both have some collectivism, but Russia is compulsory. It is oppressive, and lying and forcing and cheating someone of lower status just because you can is a flex. Ukrainian the Ukrainian sense of collectivism is voluntary. It is based on the personal value of what is in there. It is not a forced or automatic choice. So there is an individualism that's valued there. The other thing that I put in the comments is, okay, you were talking about 22 different Ukraines. I cannot recommend enough. Idea Alexandrovna's channel on YouTube. Now it's going to be all in Ukrainian, and some of them you'll really have to rely on the automatic subtitles, but you'll find beautiful accounts of what the Podil accent is, what's this accent, what's it about. But the link that I placed is titled Imperial Trauma in Ukrainian contemporary literature, and it is an eyeful of how Ukrainian literature shows the process of just recovering from the trauma of being colonized and recovering the dignity and the self story. Beyond that, there is one other author I really, or one book I really want to recommend, and hang on, I will actually want to find a link to it, but I just want to leave it there. Thank you for covering this topic. It's one of the most important ones.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that article up too. Those are very important, and I'd love to hear if you find that author. I'd love to know what the book is. And I'm always on the lookout for more books to read. Yeah, but yes, I think I don't know if I've ever seen you up before. Anyone who's interested in Ukrainian culture, stick around with us. We are there is more programming coming in the next few weeks. This is something that many people are interested in, and we have. I know that there's at least one series that's going to be starting pretty soon that will be dealing with Ukrainian culture specifically. So, yes, and I think that this is a very important aspect of this to understand the difference between Russia and Ukraine and Russians and Ukrainians. So thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate that, and I'll take a look at what you put in the purple pill. Sky Kiss, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Daniel. I actually I was hoping you would get up on the panel because I knew you could make a really wonderful contribution to the discussion. And all I wanted to say was just from my own language studies, which are not Ukrainian, it's French. Um, so in middle school, my wonderful teacher was educating us on the culture of France and how there would be all these different dialects throughout the country. and how they would be different from one place to another. So I was just going to use that to underscore what you were saying, Robin, about how there were differences in Ukraine with the language from one place to another. And it's common, truly, um, throughout at least the Romance languages, and probably um, all languages would have this, where it would be some difference from one location in a country to another. So it was, and it's completely understandable. When you delve into the indigenous uh, peoples and their cultures going back some quite some time, just to look at in the United States, you've got um, indigenous Native Americans, First Peoples, I call them, and you will find that there will be all these differences throughout the different nations. And I believe they call themselves nations. I have to look that up because it's been so long since my education. But I do have a number of friends, and yes, I've known Daniel for years, and he's been along with us in many small spaces, and so it's really great to have him here. And hello, Robin and Adam and James and Lexicon, and I see a lot of other people I know. So thank you very much, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. 'Cause Daniel, I've taken a look at the what you posted, and this I've forgotten her name already, but this commentator you mentioned, this was actually my Ukrainian conversation partner had pointed her out to me a while ago. She's really wonderful, really very insightful into Ukrainian language. So thank you. I definitely commend this to anyone. You have to use the subtitles. Probably I have trouble. She speaks very fast. Actually, I find with a lot of Ukrainians, if you put it on 0.75, it's a lot easier to understand. But anyway, but that's my except for Yaroslav Hritsak, who I don't understand at any speed. But thank God he speaks beautiful English too.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like that's what you've got to, yeah, the real life in Ukrainians in Ukraine, Ukrainians in Ukraine that you talk to, just like 0.75, and I'll do a lot better. Just bring
Yeah,
it down like
the guy at Nova Post. If I
on
could have set
board.
him at 0.50, I might have been able to figure out what the hell he was trying to tell me. Anyway, Daniel, back to you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I found a link, and it is to Oksana Lutashina's novel, Ivan and Phoebe. And this novel is about the Granite Revolution, the one that comes before, I mean, Ukraine's actual independence from the USSR. And mind you, it was a long shot. Nobody had any sense that it could succeed, but they did it all the same. Oksana Litsashina is amazing. She is a professor at here in Texas, and navigates the overly Russified Slavic studies curriculum. And what she writes is really important, I think, if you're to understand Ukrainian culture and what the roots of the later Orange Revolution and of Maidan are. This is great material, highly recommended. But thank you.
Thank you. And I want to just mention just in general, and I'll get to you right to you, Scott, because we are expanding here at Volya Radio, and we are definitely looking for new people who would like to co-host with us, who have interest in doing, even helping in certain cultural segments or anything else. If we're everywhere, oh goodness, yes, it's on our feed there. You can find the contact information. It's posted periodically. So I would encourage anyone who has an interest. We're hoping to get back to a lot more programming here, and we're definitely looking for people who are interested and involved, and who have good things to contribute, as do many of the people who've been up tonight. I really appreciate all of the input, guys, all of you. Skykiss, back to you.
Yes, I just forgot to say a big shout out to university trained people as well as those of us who branch out and, and study many topics and deeply. Um, I'm a university woman myself. I do not have my master's degree. I want to, go back and get a PhD in architectural history. It's a big lift, though, but I just might do it. So, so I I have
You
respect,
made a
great,
construction joke there, Skykiss.
great, great respect.
Architectural history. It's a big
Oh,
lift.
yes. Um, oh, I cantilever all the time. So, yeah, I, I did have a course in, let's see, it was called Architecture for Non-Majors, and my professor was just absolutely floored at my interest in it. Said, "You don't know how long I had to hold all that in." So, no, when I worked for my granddad, who was a builder, uh, a highly respected builder developer, and I did all his books and payroll, all of that. And when I didn't have any work to do, he would just love how I had all these books and I would practice drafting and he because he wanted to be an architect, but he did become a builder. He got some training building in the Navy uh, during World War II when he wasn't stationed on a minesweeper in the Pacific. He was learning to build Navy airplane hangars, and it taught him a lot of skills. He built a number of houses for people in my family, but not me. But yeah, anyway, he was just kind of tickled by that. So yes, heavy lift at this point in my life. So what I hope to do is to have because I have a fascination with, I guess we'll say 300-year-old architecture. And so the Ukrainian architecture is fascinating to me. And also their particular nods and respect, which even their more modern architecture, they give respect to their history in you know metal and stone and I also think that they look at their history when they are integrating new technologies. And so that's also been a fascination of mine, sustainable technologies in building and architecture. So yeah, it's interesting. And also, I'm an artist, so I look at the um, not only poetry and writing, which I also do, but also looking at textile arts, painting, sculpture, all of those, visual arts. And I love the music too. So I have friends who are very deeply involved in the music. And I know Daniel has done a great deal of in depth reading on the literary arts of Ukraine. So, tip of the hat there because I haven't done that yet, but I do love. Um, yeah, I just left a comment on one of Daniel's posts, and because I do think it is very good, even if you don't know the language. So sometimes I will listen more than read the subtitles. I will be listening. Say for instance, anyone who posts, whether it's a soldier or President Zelensky or one of the volunteers, and they'll be speaking in Ukrainian, and I will just listen because it's really good to understand the inflections and the different, just the different lilt of the language and how, because then your ear is being more trained. And Robin, of course, you know much more about this since you've actually gone into the studies very deeply, and thank you very much for doing that.
Well, thanks, Guy, and more power to you. I finished. I got my law degree well into my 50s. So if you have a passion for something, and go for it, I think it's great. Yeah. Well, Adam knows more about the language than I do. I'm sure he's been dealing with it his whole life. But yeah. Anyway, I found. By the way, and we are going to have to wrap up now. I'm afraid we've gone over a little bit. Adam, I ran into a new radio station. They've got an app that you can listen to Ukrainian radio on, and this one is called Kraina Marie. So a land of peace, and they had something. I put it on at night when I was going to sleep, and they had this a couple of nights ago. This hours and hours on Ukrainian Christmas songs and tradition. That was really fascinating. So yeah, it was really terrific. Anyway, but with that, and as I was mentioning before, Adam has just put up in the Nest the post that is in the Volya radio feed for people who are interested in volunteering. So I said we have need for all sorts of things. We have need for co-hosts. We have needs for people who are interested in doing research. We have certainly needs for people who want to help with audio production. If you have a skill that you would like to put at the service of helping Ukraine win this war quickly, be in touch with us, and let us know what you have that you would like to make use of, and we'll see if we can make a match with you. We're very excited about this new space, and I think we're gonna be doing some really great things, and we'd love to bring as many motivated people in as we can. Anyway, and with that, I think, Adam, we should ask you for closing thoughts. We will continue next week in this chapter 8, and move on from there. But over to you, Adam.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for a great book club, and thanks for cheering me up mostly. That's pretty down about most things, but talking with you guys always helps. And so we're going to have to close it down here, folks. Sorry, Daniel.
Let's just go to Daniel quickly. Okay, I think we've got a minute or two. If you can make it quick, Daniel, just because we have people in the back channel who need to get on to other things. But over to you, Daniel.
I hear you. I was just wanting to offer a reading of a short Ukrainian poem by someone that maybe some of us remember, Maxim Krivtsov, the defender who perished at the beginning of this year. I found the day he died, I found a poem of his that just, speaks for itself.
Good, thank you. That'd be a great way to end too. Go ahead. Thank you.
When you become a classic, your signed photos will sell for a fortune, says my friend. Big deal, I reply. I can become a classic only if I die in the war. And then, as a joke, maybe be published one day in a grant-funded book that no one will read. It will disappear as soon as you pick it up. And also, I could win the Nobel Prize for Dreams. That's one thing I've got in abundance. The end.
Thank you. Yeah, and unfortunately, he did he did become famous that way. Okay, Adam. Okay, well, Adam has had to drop. He's got guests arriving. So I'm just going to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Sky Kiss and Daniel especially for coming up. James, as always, and Lexicon for always being with us. I hope you guys will all come back, and we'll see you all next week. And I'll just close by saying Slava Ukraini. Heroyam Slava, and Pobacimo skoro. We'll see you all soon. Good night, everyone.
Welcome to Volya Radio. Слава Україні! Welcome to Volya Radio. Слава Україні!